The star lines shrunk back into stars, and the wild card was back in normal space. Straight ahead was the tiny white dwarf sun of the Chaswa system, not all that distinguishable from the bright background stars around it. Nearby, and a little to one side, a mostly dark circle edged by a slender lighted crescent, was the planet Chaswa itself. Scattered around in the darkness of space, the exhaust glows of perhaps 50 ships could be seen, both incoming and outgoing. Most are freighters and bulk cruisers, taking advantage of Chaswa's central transshipment location. A few were clearly Imperial warships. "Well, here we are," Ave said conversationally from the co-pilot station. "Incidentally, Card, I'd like to go on record as saying this is an insane idea." "Perhaps," Card conceded, shifting course toward the planet and checking his displays. Good, the rest of the group had made it in all right. But if the Empire's clone transport route does indeed run through Aura Sector, the Chaswa garrison should have records of the operation, possibly even the origin point if someone was careless. "I wasn't referring to the details of the raid," Ave said. "I meant that it was crazy for us to be getting involved in the first place. It's the New Republic's war, not ours. Let them chase it down." "If I could trust them to do so, I would," Card said, peering out the starboard viewport. Another freighter seemed to be idling slowly in the Wildcard's general direction, but I'm not sure they're up to the task. Aves grunted. "I still don't buy Skywalker's numbers. Seems to me that if you could grow stable clones that fast, the old clone masters would have done it." "Perhaps they did," Card pointed out. "I don't think any information on the cloning techniques of that era has survived. Everything I've ever seen has come from the much earlier pre-war experiments." "Yeah, well," Aves shook his head, "I'd still rather sit the whole thing out. We may discover we don't have a choice in the matter." Card gestured to the freighter, still moving up on them. "We seem to have a caller. Would you pull up an ID on him?" "Sure." Aves threw a quick look at the freighter, then turned to his board. "Not registering as any ship I've ever heard of. Wait a minute. Yeah, they've altered their ID. Simple transponder overlay, looks like. Let's see if Gent's magic decoder package can untangle it." Card nodded, the mention of Gent's name sending his thoughts flicking briefly across the galaxy to Coruscant and the two associates he'd left there under New Republic care. If the timetable their medical people had given him was correct, Mara should be about recovered by now. She should be trying to get in touch with him soon. He made a mental note to check in with the contact pipeline as soon as they were finished here. "Got it," Ave said triumphantly. Well, I do believe it's an old friend of yours, Card. The Kern's Pride, the slightly less than Honourable Samuel Thomas Gillespie, proprietor." "Is it now?" Card said, eyeing the ship pacing them 100 meters away. "I suppose we'd better see what he wants." He keyed for a tight beam transmission. "This is Talon Card, calling the Kern's Pride," he said. "Don't just sit there, Gillespie. Say hello." "Hello, Card," a familiar voice came back. "You don't mind if I figure out who I'm talking to before I say hello, do you?" "Not at all," Card assured him. "Nice little overlay on your ship ID, by the way. Obviously could have been nicer," Gillespie said, dryly. "We weren't even close to slicing yours yet. What are you doing here?" "I was about to ask you the same thing," Card said. "I was under the impression you'd been planning to retire." "I did," Gillespie said grimly. "Out of the business for good, and thanks for everything. Bought myself a big chunk of land on a nice little out-of-the-way world where I could watch the trees grow and stay out of everything that smelled like trouble. Place called Yukio. Ever hear of it?" Beside Card, Aves shook his head and muttered something under his breath. "I seem to remember hearing that name recently, yes," Card conceded. "Were you there for the Imperial attack?" "I was there for the attack, the surrender, and all the occupation I could stomach," Gillespie growled. "Matter of fact, I had about as good a front-row seat to the bombardment as you could get. It was pretty spectacular, I'll tell you that." "It could be profitable as well," Card said, thinking hard. As far as he knew, the New Republic still didn't have a handle on what exactly the Empire had done at Yukio. Hard data on the attack could be invaluable to their tactical people, as well as commanding a hefty fee for both witness and finder. "I don't suppose you took any readings during the attack?" "I've got a little from the bombardment part of it," Gillespie said. "The data card from my macro binoculars." "Why? There's a good chance I can find you a buyer for it," Card told him. "It might compensate somewhat for your lost property." "I doubt your buyer's got that much to spend," Gillespie sniffed. "You wouldn't have believed it, Card. You really wouldn't. I mean, we're not talking Slytherin here, but even Yukio should have taken them a little longer to overrun. The Empire's had a lot of practice overrunning worlds," Card reminded him. "You're lucky you made it out at all." "You got that one right," Gillespie agreed. "Fawn and Rappaport popped me about half a jump ahead of the stormtroopers, and half a jump behind the workers they sent to turn my land into a crop farm. I'm telling you, that new clone system they've got going is really creepy." Card threw a look at Aves. "How so?" "What do you mean, how so?" Gillespie retorted. "I don't happen to think people ought to come off an assembly line, thanks. And if they did, I sure as Minox wouldn't put the Empire in charge of the factory. You should have seen the guys they had manning the roadblocks. Put a shiver right straight through you." "I don't doubt it," Card said. What are your plans after leaving Chazwa? I don't hardly have any plans before I get there, Gillespie countered sourly. I was hoping to get in touch with Brask's old contact man here, see if they'd be interested in taking us on. Why, you got something better? Possibly. We can start by sending that macro-binocular data card onto my buyer, drawing payment for you against a credit line I have set up with him. After that, I have another project in mind which you might find both interesting. We got company, Aves cut him off. 2 Imperial ships heading this way. Looks like Lancer-class frigates. Uh-oh, Gillespie muttered. Maybe we didn't get off Yukio as clean as I thought. I think it more likely that we're their target, Card said, feeling his lip twist as he keyed an evasion course into the helm. It's been nice talking to you, Gillespie. If you want to continue this conversation, meet me in 8 days at the Trogan system. You know the place. I can make it if you can, Gillespie countered. If you can't, don't make it too easy for them. Card broke the contact. Hardly, he murmured. All right, here we go. Nice and easy. He eased the wildcard into a shallow portside drop, trying to make it look as if they were planning to cut past the planet itself and pick up a new hyperspace vector. Do I alert the others? Aves asked. Not yet, Card said, giving his displays a quick look and setting the nav computer to work calculating their jump to light speed. I'd rather report the mission and try again later than tangle with a pair of lancers who were serious about fighting. Yeah, Aves said slowly. Card, they're not changing course. Card looked up. Aves was right. Neither lancer had so much as twitched. They were still heading on their original vector. Straight for the Kern's Pride. He looked at Aves to find the other looking back at him. What do we do? Aves asked. Card looked back at the Imperial ships. The wildcard was a long way from being helpless in a fight, and his people were some of the best, but with weaponry that had been designed to take out enemy starfighters, 2 lancers would be better than an even match for the group he'd brought to Chazwa. As he watched, the Kern's Pride suddenly made its move, rolling into a sort of mutated dropkick choreographed maneuver, took off at high speed at a sharp angle from its original course. The lancers, not fooled a bit by the ploy, were right behind it, which left the wildcard completely in the clear. They would continue on to Chazwa, hit the garrison records, and be out before the lancers could make it back. Fast, clear, and certainly preferable as far as the New Republic was concerned. But Gillespie was an old acquaintance, and on Card's scale, a fellow smuggler placed higher than any interstellar government he didn't belong to. Apparently, Gillespie didn't get off Yukio as cleanly as he thought, he commented, bringing the wildcard around and keying for intercom. Lockton, Chin, Corvus, fire up the turbo lasers. We're going in. What about the other ships? Aves asked as he activated the deflector shields and punched up a tactical display. Let's get the lancers' attention first, Card said. The 3 men of the turbo lasers signaled ready. Taking a deep breath, he threw power to the drive. The Lancer's commander wasn't anyone's fool. Even as the wildcard drove toward them, one of the Imperial ships broke off its pursuit of the Kern's Pride and turned to confront this new threat. I think we've got their attention, Aves said tightly. Can I call the others into the party yet? Go ahead, Card told him, keying his own comm for a tight beam to the Kern's Pride. Gillespie, this is Card. Yeah, I see you, Gillespie came back. What do you think you're doing? Giving you a hand, Card said. Ahead, the Lancer's 20-quad laser batteries opened up, raining green flashes down on the wildcard. The turbo lasers fired back, their 3 groups of fire looking rather pathetic in comparison. All right, we've got this one tied down. Better get up before that other one finds the range. You've got him tied down? Gillespie retorted. Look, Card, I said get out. Card cut him off sharply. We can't hold him forever. Don't worry about me. I'm not exactly alone out here. Here they come, Ave said, and Card took a moment to glance into the rear display. They were coming all right, 15 freighters strong, all zeroing in on the suddenly outgunned Lancer. From the comm came an amazed whistle. You weren't kidding, were you? Gillespie commented. No, I wasn't, Card said. Now get going, will you? Gillespie laughed out loud. I'll let you in on a little secret, Card. I'm not alone either. And suddenly, barely visible through the haze of laser fire hammering at the wildcard's viewports, the exhaust glows of nearly 20 ships suddenly veered off their individual courses. Swinging in like hungry barrel, they converged on the second Lancer. So, Card, Gillespie continued conversationally, at a guess I'd say neither of us is going to get much business done at Chazwa this time around. What say we continue this conversation somewhere else? Say in 8 days? Card smiled. I'll look forward to it. He looked back at the Lancer, and his smile faded. Standard Lancer crew was 850, and from the capable way that one was holding off the rest of the ships, he would guess they were running a full complement. How many of them, he wondered, had been freshly created at Grand Admiral Thrawn's clone factory? By the way, Gillespie, he added, if you happen to run into any of our colleagues on the way, you might want to invite them along. I think they'd be interested in what I have to say. You got it, Card, Gillespie grunted. See you in 8. Card switched off the comm, so that was it. Gillespie would broadcast the word to the other major smuggling groups, and knowing Gillespie, the open invitation would quickly transmit it to something just short of a command appearance. They'd be at Trogan, all of them, or near enough. Now all he had to figure out was what exactly he was going to say to them. Grand Admiral Thrawn leaned back in his command chair. "All right, gentlemen," he said, his gaze flicking in turn to each of the 14 men standing in a loose semicircle around his console. "Are there any questions?" The slightly rumpled-looking man at one end of the semicircle glanced at the others. "No questions, Admiral," he said, his precise military voice in sharp contrast to his civilian, sloppy appearance. "What's our timetable?" "Your freighter is being prepped now," Thrawn told him. "You'll leave as soon as it's ready. How soon do you expect to penetrate the Imperial Palace?" "No sooner than 6 days from now, sir," the rumpled man said. "I'd like to hit 1 or 2 other ports before taking the ship into Coruscant. Their security will be easy to breach if we have a legitimate data trail they can backtrack. Unless you want it done sooner, of course." Thrawn's glowing eyes narrowed slightly, and Palaeon could tell what he was thinking. Mara Jade, sitting there in the middle of Rebel headquarters, perhaps at this very moment giving them the location of the Emperor's storehouse on Wayland. "Timing is critical in this operation," Thrawn told the Commander Leader, "but speed alone is useless if you're compromised before even entering the palace. You'll be the man on the scene, Major Himron. I leave it to your judgment." The Commander Leader nodded. "Yes, sir. Thank you, Admiral. We won't fail you." Thrawn smiled fractionally. "I know you won't, Major." Dismissed. Silently, the 14 men turned and filed out of the command room. "You seemed surprised, Captain, at some of my instructions," Thrawn commented as the door slid shut behind them. "Yes, sir, I was," Palaeon admitted. "It all made sense, of course," he added hastily. "I simply haven't thought the operation out to that endpoint. All endpoints must be prepared for," Thrawn said, keying his board. The lights muted, and on the walls of the command room a sampling of holographic paintings and planets appeared. "Mriss artwork," he identified it for Palaeon's benefit. "One of the most curious examples of a mission to be found anywhere in the civilized galaxy. Until they were contacted by the 10th Alderanian expedition, not a single one of the dozens of Mriss cultures had ever developed any form of three-dimensional artwork." "Interesting," Palaeon said dutifully. "Some flaw in their perceptual makeup?" "Many of the experts still think so," Thrawn said. "It seems clear to me, though, that the oversight was actually a case of cultural blind spots combined with a very subtle but equally strong social harmonization, a combination of traits we'll be able to exploit." Palaeon looked at the artwork, his stomach tightening. "We're attacking Mrist? It's certainly ripe for the taking," Thrawn pointed out, "and a base there would give us the capability to launch attacks into the very heart of the rebellion." "Except that the rebellion must know that," Palaeon said carefully. "If C'baoth's ongoing demands for an attack on Coruscant had finally gotten to the Grand Admiral, then launch a massive counterattack, sir, if we so much as made a move toward Mrist." "Exactly," Thrawn said, smiling with grim satisfaction. "Which means that when we're finally ready to draw the Coruscant sector fleet into ambush, Mrist will be the perfect lure to use. If they come out to meet us, we'll defeat them then and there, and if they somehow sense the trap and refuse to engage, we'll have our forward base. Either way, the Empire will triumph." He reached to his board again, and the holographic artwork faded into a tactical star map. "But that battle is still in the future," he said. "For now, our prime goal is to build a force strong enough to ensure that ultimate victory, and to keep the rebellion off balance while we do so." Palaeon nodded. "The assault on Ord Mantell should go a long way toward accomplishing that." "It will certainly create a degree of fear in the surrounding systems," Thrawn agreed, "as well as drawing away some of the rebel pressure on our shipyard supply lines." "That would be helpful," Palaeon said with a scowl. "The last report from Bill Bringy said the shipyards there were running critically low on Tabana gas, as well as Theridium and Camarus. I've already ordered the Bespin garrison to step up their Tabana gas production," Thrawn said, tapping his control board. "As for the metals, intelligence recently reported locating a convenient stockpile." The report came up, and Palaeon leaned forward to read it. He got as far as the location listing. "This is intelligence's idea of a convenient stockpile? I take it you disagree?" Thrawn asked mildly. Palaeon looked at the report again, feeling a grimace settling in on his face. The Empire had Lando Calrissian's walking mining complex on the super-hot planet N'Klon once before, back when they needed mole miners for Thrawn's assault on the Sluisvan shipyards. That other raid had cost the Empire over 1 million man-hours, first in preparing the Star Destroyer Judicator for the intense heat at N'Klon's close orbit distance from its sun, and then for repairing the damage afterward. "I suppose that depends, sir," he said, "on how long we'll be losing the use of whichever Star Destroyer is detailed to the raid." "A valid question," Thrawn agreed. "Fortunately, there will be no need this time to tie up any Star Destroyers. 3 of our new dreadnoughts should be more than adequate to neutralize N'Klon's security." "But a dreadnought won't be able to—" Palaeon interrupted himself as he suddenly understood. "It won't have to be big enough to survive in open sunlight. If they can take over one of the shield ships that fly freighters in and way out of the inner system, a dreadnought will be small enough to stay behind its umbrella." "Exactly," Thrawn nodded. "And capturing one should pose no problem. For all their impressive size, shield ships are little more than shielding, cooling systems, and a small container ship's worth of power and crew. 6 fully loaded assault shuttles should make quick work of it. Palaon nodded, still skimming the report. What happens if Calrissian sells his stockpiles before the assault force gets there? He won't, Thrawn assured him. The market price for metals has just begun to rise again, and men like Calrissian always wait for it to go just a little higher. Unless Calrissian was suddenly overcome with a swell of patriotic fervour toward his friends back in the New Republic hierarchy, decided to sell his metals at a reduced price. I still recommend, sir, that the attack be carried out as soon as possible. Recommendation noted, Captain, Thrawn said, smiling slightly, and as it happens, already acted upon. The raiders launched 10 minutes ago. Palaon smiled tightly. Someday, he decided, he'd learn not to try to guess the Grand Admiral. Yes, sir. Thrawn leaned back in his chair. Return to the bridge, Captain, and prepare to make the jump to light speed. Ord Mantell is waiting. The beeping from his board prodded Luke out of his light doze. Blinking away from the sleep, he gave the displays a quick scan. "R2," he called, stretching as best he could in the tight confines of the cockpit. "We're just about there. Get ready." A nervous-sounding warble came in acknowledgement. "Come on, R2, relax," Luke urged the droid, settling his fingertips around the X-Wing's hyperspace lever and letting the force flow through him. Almost time. Now. He pulled the lever back and the starlines appeared and collapsed back into stars. And there, directly ahead, was the Nograi homeworld of Honogir. R2 gave a soft whistle. "I know," Luke agreed, feeling a little sick himself. Leia had told him what to expect, but even if that warning, the sight of the world lying in the X-Wing's path was a shock. Beneath the sparse white clouds floating over the surface, the entire planetary landmass was a flat, uniform brown. Calm grass, Leia had called it, the local Honogran plants the Empire had genetically modified to perpetuate their systematic destruction of the planet's ecology. That deceit, combined with first Vader's and later Thrawn's carefully limited aid, had bought the Empire 4 decades of Nograi service. Even now, squads of Nograi Def Commandos were scattered around the galaxy, fighting and dying for those whose cold-blooded treachery and counterfeit compassion had turned them into slaves. R2 warbled something, and Luke broke his gaze away from the silent monument to Imperial ruthlessness. "I don't know," he admitted as the droid's question scrolled across his computer display. "We'd have to get a team of environment and ecology specialists out here before we could tell. Doesn't look very hopeful, though, does it?" The droid chirped, an electronic shrug that turned suddenly into a startled shrill. Luke's head jerked up, just as a small fast-attack patrol ship shot past overhead. "I think they've spotted us," he commented as casually as possible. "Let's hope it's the Nograi, not an imp. Starfighter, identify yourself." A deep cat-like voice mewed from the comm. Luke keyed for transmission, reaching out with the force toward the patrol ship that was now curving back into the attack position. Even at this range, he should have been able to sense a human pilot, which meant that it was indeed a Nograi out there. At least he hoped so. "This is Luke Skywalker," he said, "son of the Lord Darth Vader, brother of Leia Organa Solo." For a long moment the comm was silent. "Why have you come?" Normal prudence, Luke knew, would have suggested that he not bring up the matter of his power cells until he had a better idea of how matters stood politically with the Nograi leaders, but Leia had mentioned several times how impressed she'd been by the Nograi sense of honor and straightforward honesty. "My ship's primary power cells have been damaged," he told the other. "I thought you might be able to help me." There was a soft hiss from the comm. "You place us in great danger, son of Vader," the Nograi said. "Imperial ships come to Honogir at random times. If you are sighted, all will suffer." "I understand," Luke said, a small weight lifting from him. If the Nograi were worried about him being spotted by Imperials, at least they hadn't completely rejected Leia's invitation to rebel against the Empire. "If you'd prefer, I'll leave." He held his breath as, behind him, R2 moaned softly. If the Nograi took him up on his offer, it was questionable as to whether they'd be able to get anywhere else on the power they had left. Apparently the Nograi pilot was thinking along the same lines. "The Lady Vader has already risked much on behalf of the Nograi," he said. "We cannot permit you to endanger your life. Follow me, son of Vader. I will bring you to what safety the Nograi can offer." According to Leia, there was only a single small area on Honogir that had been made capable of supporting any plant life other than the Empire's bioengineered calm grass. Karbrak and the matriarch of the clan Kimbar had kept her, Chewbacca, and 3PO in one of the villages there, managing with skill and more than a little luck to hide her from prying Imperial eyes. Leia had included the location of the clean land along with the coordinates of the system itself, and as Luke followed the patrol ship down toward the surface of the planet, it quickly became apparent that they weren't going there. "Where are we headed?" he asked the Nograi pilot as they dipped beneath a layer of clouds. "To the future of our world," the alien said. "Ah," Luke murmured under his breath. A double line of jagged cliffs could be seen ahead, looking a little like stylized dorsal ridges from a pair of Tatooine Krayt dragons. "Is your future in those mountains?" he suggested. There was another soft hiss from the comm. "As the Lady Vader and the Lord Vader before her," the Nograi said. "You also read the souls of the Nograi." Luke shrugged. Hadn't been much more than a lucky guess, actually. Where do we go? Others will show you, the pilot said, for here I must leave you. Farewell, son of Vader. My family will long cherish the honor of this day. The patrol ship cut sharply upward, heading back towards space. And in perfect synchronization, two combat-equipped cloud cars arose from seemingly nowhere to settle into flanking positions. We greet you, son of Vader, a new voice said from the comm. We are honored to guide you. Follow. One of the cloud cars moved ahead to take the point, the other dropping back to rearguard position. Luke stayed with the formation, trying to see just where they might be headed. As far as he could tell, the cliffs were as barren as the rest of the planet. R2 chirped, and a message scrolled across Luke's display. A river? Luke asked, peering out his canopy. Where? Oh, there it is. Emptying out from between the two cliff lines, right? The droid peeped in affirmative. It looked to be a pretty fast-moving river, too. Luke decided as they flew closer, and he could see the numerous lines of white water indicating submerged rocks. Probably explained why the gorge between the two cliff lines was so sharp and deep. They reached the end of the cliff lines a few minutes later. The lead cloud car turned to port side, lifting smoothly over a set of foothills and disappearing around the side of one of the higher crags. Luke followed, smiling tightly as an old memory came to mind. He was required to maneuver straight down this trench. Guiding the X-Wing around the foothills, he flew into the shadow of the cliffs themselves, and into an entirely different world. Along the narrow banks of the river, the ground was a solid mass of brilliant green. R2 whistled in startled amazement. They're plants, Luke said, realizing only after the words were out of his mouth how ridiculous they sounded. Of course they were plants, but to find plants on Honoghr is the future of our world, one of his escorts said. There was no mistaking the grim pride in his voice. The future which the Lady Vader gave us. Continue to follow, son of Vader. The landing area is still ahead. The landing area turned out to be a large, flat-topped boulder jutting partway into the swift-moving river, about 2 kilometers along the gorge. With a cautious eye on the racing water beneath him, Luke eased the X-Wing down. Fortunately, it was larger than it had looked from 50 meters up. The cloud cars waited until he had touched down, then swung around and headed back down the gorge. Shutting the X-Wing systems back to standby, Luke looked around. The greenery he saw now was not as monochromatic as he'd first thought. There were at least 4 slightly different shades represented, intermingled in a pattern that was too consistent to be accidental. A pipe could be seen angling down into the river at one point, its other end disappearing up into the plant growth. Utilizing the pressure of the current, he decided to bring water up over the bank for irrigation. A few meters downstream from the boulder, hidden from view by a rock overhang, he could see a small hut-like building. 2 Nograi stood just outside its door, one of steely grey skin, the other a much darker grey. Even as he watched, they started toward him. Looks like a reception committee, Luke commented to R2, hitting the switch to pop his canopy. You stay put here, and I mean stay put. You fall in the water like you did that first trip to Dagobah, and you'll be lucky if we can even find all the pieces. There was no need to give the order twice. R2 wobbled a nervous acknowledgement, then an equally nervous question. Yes, I'm sure they're friendly, Luke assured him, pulling off his flight helmet and getting to his feet. Don't worry, I won't be going far. Vaulting over the X-Wing side, he headed toward his hosts. The 2 Nograi were already at the edge of the landing boulder, standing silently watching him. Luke grimaced to himself as he walked toward them, stretching out with the force and wishing he was skilled enough to get some reading, any reading, on this species. In the name of the New Republic, I bring you greetings, he said when he was close enough to be heard over the roar of the river. I'm Luke Skywalker, son of the Lord Darth Vader, brother of Leia Organa Solo. He held out his left hand, palm upward, as Leia had instructed him to do. The older Nograi stepped forward and touched his snout to Luke's palm. The nostrils flattened themselves against his skin, and Luke had to fight to keep from twitching away from the tickling sensation. I greet you, son of Vader, the alien said, releasing Luke's hand. In unison, both Nograi dropped to their knees, hands splaying out to the sides in the deference gesture Leia had described. I am of Kavam, clan Baktor. I serve the Nograi people here at the future of our world. You honor us with your presence. I am honored by your hospitality, Luke said as both aliens rose again to their feet. And your companion is... I am Kabarak clan Kimbar, the younger Nograi said. The clan of Vader has now doubly honored me. Kabarak clan Kimbar, Luke repeated, eyeing the young alien with new appreciation. So this was the young Nograi commander who had risked everything, first in bringing Leia to his people, then in protecting her from Grand Admiral Thrawn. For your service to my sister Leia, I thank you. My family and I are in your debt. The debt is not yours, son of Vader, Kavam said. The debt rather belongs to the Nograi people. The actions of Kabarak clan Kimbar were only the first line of repayment. Luke nodded, not really sure of what to say to that. You called this place the future of your world? He asked, hoping to change the subject. It is the future given to the Nograi people by the Lady Vader, Kavam said, waving his hands in a circular gesture that took in the entire valley. Here with her gift we cleansed the land of the Empire's poisoned plants. Here will someday be enough food to provide for all. It's impressive, Luke said, and meant it. Out in the open, all that greenery would have stood out against the background calm grass like a banfat at a Jawa family gathering. But here, with the twin cliff lines blocking the view from everywhere except more or less straight up, there was a good chance incoming Imperial ships would never even suspect its existence. The river supplied ample water, the lower latitude implied a slightly longer growing season than that at the clean land itself, and if worst came to worst, a number of properly placed explosives could dam the river or bring down part of the cliffs themselves, burying the evidence of their quiet rebellion against the Empire. And the Noghrai had barely a month to plan, design, and build it all. No wonder Thrawn and Vader before him had found the Noghrai to be such useful servants. It was the Lady Vader who made it possible. Of-Gavam said, "We have little to offer in the way of hospitality, son of Vader, but what we have is yours." "Thank you," Luke nodded. "But as your patrol ship pilot pointed out, my presence on Honogare is a danger to you. If you can provide my ship with replacement power cells, I'll be on my way as quickly as I can. I would pay, of course. We could accept no payment from the son of Vader," Of-Gavam said, looking shocked at the very idea. "It would be merely a single line of the debt owed by the Noghrai people." "I understand," Luke said, stifling a sigh. They meant well, certainly, but all this guilt about their service to the Empire was going to have to stop. Races and beings far more sophisticated than they had been equally taken in by the Emperor's deceits. "I suppose the first step is to find out whether you have spares that'll fit my ship. How do we go about doing that?" "It is already done," Carbarak said. "The cloud cars will carry word of your need to the spaceport at Nystau. The power cells and technicians to install them will be here by nightfall. Meanwhile, we offer you our hospitality," Of-Gavam added, throwing a sideways look at Carbarak, perhaps feeling the younger Noghrai should let his elder do the talking. "I'd be honored," Luke said. "Lead the way." The hut under the cliff overhang was as small as it had looked from the landing boulder. Most of the available space was taken up by two narrow cots, a low table, and what appeared to be the food storage/preparation module from a small spaceship, but at least it was quieter than outside. "This will be your home while you are on Honogare," Of-Gavam told him. "Carbarak and I will stand guard outside, to protect you with our lives." "That won't be necessary," Luke assured them, looking around the room. Clearly it had been set up for long-term occupancy. "What do you two do here, if I may ask?" "I am caretaker to this place," Of-Gavam said. "I walk the land, see that the plants are growing properly." Carbarak clan Kimbar, he looked at the younger alien, and Luke got the distinct impression of a grim humour in the glance. "Carbarak clan Kimbar is a fugitive from the Noghrai people. Even now we have many ships searching for him." "Of course," Luke said dryly. With Grand Admiral Thrawn threatening to subject Carbarak to a complete Imperial interrogation, it had been vital that the young commando escape from custody and drop out of sight. It was equally vital that knowledge of the Empire's betrayal be passed on to Noghrai commando teams scattered around the galaxy. The two objectives dovetailed rather nicely. "Do you require food?" Of-Gavam asked. "Or rest?" "I'm fine, thank you," Luke said. "I think the best thing would probably be for me to go back to my ship and start pulling those power cells out." "May I assist?" Carbarak asked. "I'd appreciate that, yes," Luke said. He didn't need any help, but the sooner the Noghrai worked out this supposed debt of theirs, the better. "Come on, toolkit's in the ship." "There is further word from Nystau," Carbarak said, moving invisibly through the darkness to where Luke sat with his back against the X-Wing's landing skid. "The captain of the Imperial ship has decided to complete minor repairs here. He expects the work to take 2 days," he hesitated. "To you, son of Vader, the Dynasts express their apologies." "No apology necessary," Luke assured him, looking up past the shadow of the starfighter's wing at the thin band of stars shining down amid the otherwise total blackness. "So that was that. He was stuck here for 2 more days. I knew when I came here that this might happen. I'm just sorry I have to impose further on you. Your presence is not an imposition." "I appreciate the hospitality," Luke nodded toward the stars overhead. "I take it there's still no indication they might have spotted my ship. Would the son of Vader not know if that happened?" Carbarak countered. Luke smiled in the darkness. "Even Jedi have limitations, Carbarak. Distant danger is very hard to detect." And yet, he reminded himself silently, the Force was obviously still with him. That strike cruiser up there could easily have turned up at a far more awkward time, say while the Noghrai tech team had been in transit to or from the village, or even while Luke himself was heading out to space. An alert captain could have picked up on either and brought the whole thing crashing down right there. There was a whisper of a movement, felt rather than heard over the sound of the river as Carbarak sat down beside him. "It is not enough, is it?" the Noghrai asked quietly. "This place, the Dynasts call it our future. But it is not." Luke shook his head. "No," he had to admit. "You've done a tremendous job with this place, and it'll certainly help you feed your people. But the future of Honogare itself... I'm not an expert, Carbarak, but from what I've seen here, I don't think Honogare can be saved. The Nograi hissed between his needle teeth, the sound barely audible over the racing water below. You speak the thought of many of the Nograi people, he said. Perhaps none really believe otherwise. We can help you find a new home, Luke promised. There are many worlds in the galaxy. We'll find you a place where you can begin again. Kabrak hissed again. But it will not be Honogare. Luke swallowed hard. No. For a minute neither spoke. Luke listened to the sounds of the river, his heart aching with sympathy for the Nograi. What had been done to Honogare was far beyond his power to change. The Jedi indeed had their limitations. There was another ripple of air as Kabrak climbed back to his feet. Are you hungry? He asked Luke. If so, I can bring food. Yes, thank you, Luke said. The Nograi left. Stifling a sigh, Luke shifted position against the landing skid. It was bad enough knowing there was a problem he was helpless to solve. To have to sit here for 2 days with the whole thing staring at him accusingly in the face only made it worse. He looked up at the thin trail of stars, wondering what Leia had thought of the whole situation. Had she, too, realized that Honogare was too far gone to save? Or could she have had some idea of how to bring it back? Or had she been too busy with the immediate concerns of survival to even think that far ahead? He grimaced as another small pang of guilt tugged at him. Somewhere out there on Coruscant, his sister was about to give birth to her twins. Might have already done so as far as he knew. For all he knew. Han was with her, of course, but he'd wanted to be there too. Even if he couldn't be there, but if he couldn't be there in person. Taking a deep breath, he allowed his body to relax. Once before on Dagobah, he'd been able to reach out to the future, to see his friends and the path they were on. Then he'd had Yoda to guide him, but if he could find the proper pattern on his own, he might be able to catch a glimpse of his niece and nephew. Carefully, keeping his thoughts and will focused, he stretched out through the Force. Leia was crouching in the darkness, her blaster and lightsaber in her hands, her heart racing with fear and determination. Behind her was Winter, holding tightly to 2 small lives, helpless and fragile. A voice, Han's, filled with anger and the same determination. Chewbacca was somewhere nearby, somewhere overhead, he thought, and Lando was with him. Before them were shadowy figures, their minds filled with menace and a cold and deadly purpose. A blaster fired, and another, a door burst open. Leia! Luke blurted, his body jerking violently as the chance broke like a bubble, one final image flickering and vanishing into the Honogare night. A faceless person, moving toward his sister and her children from behind the shadowy evil. A person edged with the power of the Force. What is it? A Nograi voice snapped beside him. Luke opened his eyes to find Kabrak and Ov Kavam crouching in front of him, a small glow rod bathing their nightmare faces in dim light. I saw Leia, he told them, hearing the trembling of reaction in his voice. She and her children were in danger. He took a shuddering breath, purging the adrenaline from his body. I have to get back to Coruscant. Ov Kavam and Kabrak exchanged glances. But if the danger is now, Ov Kavam said. It wasn't now, Luke shook his head. It was the future. I don't know how far ahead. Kabrak touched Ov Kavam's shoulder, and for a minute the Nograi conversed quietly in their own language. All right, Luke told himself, running through the Jedi calming techniques. All right. Lando had been in the vision. He distinctly remembered seeing Lando there, but Lando, as far as he knew, was still out at his Nomad City mining operation on Klon, which meant Luke still had time to get back to Coruscant before the attack on Leia could happen. Or did it? Was the vision a true image of the future? Or could a change in events alter what he'd seen? Difficult to see, Master Yoda had said of Luke's vision on Dagobah. Always in motion is the future. And if someone of Yoda's depth of knowledge in the Force had been able to sift through the uncertainties, if you wish it, son of Vader, the commandos will seize the Imperial ship, Ov Kavam said. If its people were destroyed quickly, there would be no word from it that would point blame at the Nograi. I can't let you do that, Luke shook his head. It's too dangerous. There's no way to guarantee they wouldn't get a message off. Ov Kavam drew himself up. If the Lady Vader is in danger, the Nograi people are willing to take that risk. Luke looked up at them, an odd sensation rippling through him. Those nightmare Nograi faces hadn't changed, but in the space of a heartbeat, Luke's perception of them had. No longer were they just another abstract set of alien features. Suddenly they had become the faces of friends. The last time I had a vision like this, I rushed off without thinking to try and help, he told them quietly. Not only didn't I help them any, but I also nearly cost them their own chance at escape. He looked down at this artificial right hand, feeling again the ghostly memory of Vader's lightsaber slicing through his wrist, and lost other things too. He looked back up at them. I won't make that same mistake again, not with the lives of the Nograi people at stake. I'll wait until the Imperial ship is gone. Kabrak reached out to gently touch his shoulder. Do not be concerned for their safety, son of Vader, he said. The Lady Vader will not easily be defeated, not with the Wookiee Chewbacca at her side. Luke looked up at the stars overhead. Now, with Han and Chewie in the whole of palace security beside her, Leia should be able to handle any normal intruders. But there was that final unformed image, the person who he'd seen drawing on the Force. On Jomark, the Jedi Master Sabaoth had made it abundantly clear that he wanted Leia and her children. Could he want them badly enough to personally go to Coruscant for them? They will prevail, Kabrak repeated. With an effort, Luke nodded. I know, he said, trying to sound like he meant it. There was no sense in all of them worrying. The last of the fires were out, the last of the micro-fractures sealed, the last of the injured taken to sickbay. And with an odd mixture of resignation and cold-blooded fury, Lando Calrissian gazed out his private command room window and knew that it was over. Cloud City on Bespin, and now Nomad City on Klon. For the second time, the Empire had taken something he'd worked to create, had worked and sweated and connived to build, and had turned it to ashes. From his desk console came a beep. Stepping over to it, he leaned down and touched the comm switch. Calrissian, he said, wiping his other hand across his forehead. Sir, this is Baggett in Engine Central. A tired voice came. The last drive motivator just went. Lando grimaced, but after all the damage those TIE fighters had inflicted on his walking mining operation, it didn't exactly come as a surprise. Any chance of fixing enough of them to get us moving again? He asked. Not without a frigate's worth of spare parts, Baggett said. Sorry, sir, but there are just too many things broken or fused. Understood. In that case, you'd better have your people concentrate on keeping life support going. Yes, sir. Sir, there's a rumour going around that we've lost all long-range communications. It's only temporary, Lando assured him. We've got people working on it right now, and enough spare parts to build 2 new transmitters. Yes, sir, Baggett said, sounding a shade less discouraged. Well, I guess I'll get over to life support. Keep me informed, Lando told him. Switching off the comm, he walked back to the window. 20 days they had, just 20 days before Klon's slow rotation took them from the centre of the night side across into full sunlight, at which point it wouldn't matter much whether or not the drive motivators, communication gear, or even life support were working. When the sun began to slow crawl up the horizon over there, everyone still left in Nomad City would be on their way to a very fast and very warm death. 20 days. Lando gazed out the viewport at the night sky, letting his eyes flick across the constellation patterns he'd dreamed up in his occasional idle moments. If they could get the long-range transmitter fixed in the next day or so, they should be able to call Coruscant for help. No matter what the Imperial attack force might have done to the shield ships at the Outer System Depot, the New Republic spaceship techs ought to be able to get one of them flying again, at least well enough for one last trip into the inner system. It would be tight, but with any luck at all. Abruptly his train of thought broke off. There, just shy of directly overhead, the brilliant star of an approaching shield ship had appeared. Reflexively, he took a step toward his desk to sound battle stations. If that was the Imperials again, come to finish the job. He stopped. No, if it was the Imperials, then that was that. He had no more fighters left to send against them, and no defences remaining on Nomad City itself. There was no point in stirring up the rest of his people for nothing. And then, from the desk came the screeching static of a comm override signal. Nomad City, this is General Beliblis, a well-remembered voice boomed out. Can anyone hear me? Lando dived for the desk. This is Lando Calrissian, General, he said, striving for as much nonchalance as he could muster. Is that you out there? That's us, Beliblis acknowledged. We were out at Cat Krystack when we picked up your distress signal. I'm sorry we couldn't get here in time. So am I, Lando said. What's it look like at the shield ship depot? Afraid it's something of a mess, Beliblis said. These shield ships of yours are too big to easily destroy, but the Imperials took a crack at it just the same. At the moment, this one seems to be the only one in any shape to fly. Well, it's all pretty academic anyway, Lando said. Nomad City is done for. No way to get it moving again? Not in the 20 days we've got before the Dawn Line catches up with us, Lando told him. We might be able to dig it underground, deep enough to last out a trip around the dayside, but we need heavy equipment that we haven't got. Maybe we can pull it off Naklon entirely and take it to the outer system for repairs, Beliblis suggested. An assault frigate and a couple of heavy lifters should do the trick if we can get another shield ship flying, and can convince Admiral Akbar to divert an assault frigate from the battle planes, Lando reminded him. Point, Beliblis admitted. I suppose I should hear the rest of the bad news. What all did the Empire get? Lando sighed. Everything, he said. All our stockpiles. Freedium, Camrus, Dolomite, you name it. If we mined it, they got it. How much in all? About 4 months' worth. Little over 3 million at current market prices. For a moment, Beliblis was silent. I didn't realize this place was that productive. Makes it all the more imperative that we persuade Coruscant to help get you up and running again. How many people do you have down there? Just under 5,000, Lando told him. Some of them are in pretty bad shape, though. I've had plenty of experience moving injured people, Beliblis said grimly. Don't worry, we'll get them aboard. I'd like you to detail a group to stay behind and get the shield ships operational. We'll transport everyone to Cat Krystack. Be as good a place as any for you to transmit a formal request for assistance to Coruscant. I didn't think there were any good places to transmit requests from, Lando growled. They've got a lot on their minds back there, Beliblis agreed. For what it's worth, I'd say you've got a better than average chance that yours won't get lost in the shuffle. Lando chewed at his lip. So let's skip the shuffle entirely. Take me to Coruscant and let me talk to him in person. That'll cost you an extra 5 days in travel time, Beliblis pointed out. Can you afford it? Better 5 days spent that way than sitting around Cat Krystack wondering if my transmission has even gotten out of the communications center yet, Lando countered. Figure 5 days to Coruscant, another day or two to talk Leia into reassigning a ship and lifters, and then 10 more to get them here and finish the job. 17 days. Cuts are pretty close. I don't have any better ideas. What do you say? Beliblis snorted gently. Well, I'd been planning to head over to Coruscant soon anyway. Might as well be now. Thank you, General, Lando said. No problem. Better start getting your people ready. We'll be launching our shuttles as soon as we're in the planetary Umbra. Right. See you soon. Lando switched off the comm. It was a long shuttle ride. He knew that much going in. But realistically, it was the only shot he had. And besides, even if they turned him down flat, a trip to Coruscant right now wouldn't be such a bad idea. You get to see Leia and Han and the brand new twins, maybe even run into Luke or Wedge. He glanced out the viewport, his lip twisting. And on Coruscant at least, he wouldn't have to worry about Imperial attacks. Keying the intercom, he began issuing the evacuation orders. Jason had fallen asleep midway through his dinner, but Jaina was still going at it. Lying on her side, Leia shifted position as much as she could on the bed without pulling out of her daughter's reach and picked up her data pad again. By her own slightly fuzzy count, she tried at least 4 times to get through this page. 5th time's the charm, she commented dryly to Jaina, stroking her daughter's head with her free hand. Jaina, with more immediate things on her mind, didn't respond. For a moment Leia gazed down at her daughter, a fresh surge of wonder rippling upward through her weariness, those tiny hands that flailed gently and randomly against her body, the skull cap of short black hairs covering her head, that small face with its wonderfully earnest expression of infant concentration as she worked at eating. A brand new life, so fragile and yet so remarkably resilient, and she and Han had created both of them. Across the room, the door from the living areas of their suite opened. Hi, sweetheart, Han called quietly. Everything all right? Fine, she murmured back. We're just having another dinner. They eat like starving Wookiees, Han said, crossing to the bed and giving the situation a quick scan. Jason done already? Just wanted a snack, I guess, Leia said, craning her neck to look at the sleeping baby lying on the bed behind her. He'll probably want the second course in an hour or so. Wish they'd get together on scheduling, Han said, sitting carefully down on the side of the bed and easing the tip of his forefinger into Jason's palm. His tiny hand curled reflexively around his finger, and they looked up at her husband in time to see his familiar lopsided grin. He's going to be a strong one. You should feel the grip at this end, Leia told him, looking back at Jaina. Is Lando still downstairs? Yeah, he and Beliblis are still talking to Admiral Drayson, Han said, reaching over to rest his free hand on Leia's shoulder. The warmth felt good through her thin dressing gown. Almost as good as the warmth of his thoughts against her mind. Still trying to convince him to divert a couple of ships to Naklon. How does it look? Han wiggled his finger gently in Jason's grip, clucking softly at his sleeping son. Not too good, he admitted. We're not going to get Nomad City off the ground without something the size of an assault frigate. Drayson isn't exactly eager to pull anything that big off the line. Did you point out how much we need the metals Lando's been mining there? I mentioned it. He wasn't impressed. You have to know how to talk to Drayson. Leia looked down at Jaina. She was still going at it, but her eyes were beginning to drift closed. Maybe when Jane is asleep I can go downstairs and give Lando a hand. Right, Han said dryly. No offense, sweetheart, but falling asleep on the table is not going to impress anyone. Leia made a face at him. I'm not that tired, thank you. I'm certainly getting as much sleep as you are. Not even close, Han said, shifting his hand from Leia's shoulder to stroke Jaina's cheek. I get to doze in the middle of those late-night feedings. You shouldn't be waking up for them at all, Leia said. Winter or I could get the babies out of their crib just as well as you can. Nice, Han said in mock indignation. You know, you thought I was pretty handy to have around before the kids showed up. Now you don't need me anymore, huh? Just go ahead and toss me aside. Of course I need you, Leia soothed him. As long as most of the droids are out on defense duty and there are 2 babies who have to be changed, you'll always have a place here. Oh, great, Han growled. I think I'd rather get tossed aside. It's way too late for that, Leia assured him, stroking his hand and turning serious again. I know you want to help, Han, and I really do appreciate it. I just feel guilty. Well, don't, Han told her, taking her hand and squeezing it. We old-time smugglers are used to strange hours, remember? He glanced over at the door to Winter's room. Winter gone to bed already? No, she hasn't come back up yet, Leia said, stretching her mind toward the room. As near as she could tell, it was indeed empty. She's got some project of her own going downstairs. I don't know what. I do, Han said, his sense turning thoughtful. She's been down in the library, sifting through the old Alliance archives. Leia craned her neck to study his face. Trouble? I don't know, Han said slowly. Winter doesn't talk much about what she's thinking. Not to me, anyway. But she's worried about something. Beyond the door, Leia caught the flicker of another presence. She's back, she told Han. I'll see if I can get her to tell me about it. Good luck, Han grunted, giving Leia's hand one last squeeze and standing up. I guess I'll go back downstairs, see if I can help Lando sweet-talk Drayson a little. The two of you ought to get him into a Sabbath game, Leia suggested. Play for ships like you and Lando did with the Falcon. Maybe you can win an assault frigate. What, playing against Drayson? Han said with a snort. Thanks, Han, but Lando and I wouldn't know what to do with a fleet of our own. I'll see you later. Okay. I love you, Han. He gave her another lopsided smile. I know, he said, and left. With a sigh, Leia adjusted her shoulder against the pillar and half-turned toward Winter's room. Winter, she called softly. There was a short pause, then the door swung quietly open. Yes, Your Highness? Winter asked, stepping into the room. I'd like to talk to you for a minute, if it's convenient, Leia said. Of course, Winter said, gliding forward in that wonderfully graceful way of hers that Leia had always envied. I think Jason's asleep. Shall I put him in the crib? Please, Leia nodded. Han tells me you've been doing some research in the old Alliance archives. Winter's face didn't change, but Leia could sense the subtle change in her sense and body language. Yes. May I ask why? Carefully, Winter lifted Jason from the bed and carried him toward the crib. I think I may have discovered an Imperial agent in the palace, she said. I was trying to confirm that. Leia felt the hairs on the back of her neck stand up. Who is it? I'd really rather not make any accusations before I have more information, Winter said. I could easily be wrong. I appreciate your scruples, Leia said. But if you have an idea about this Delta Source information leak, we need to know about it right away. This isn't connected with Delta Source, Winter said, shaking her head. At least not directly. She hasn't been here long enough for that. Leia frowned at her, trying to read her sense. There was a great deal of worry there, running squarely into an equally strong desire not to throw around hasty allegations. Is it Mara Jade? She asked. Winter hesitated. Yes. But again, I don't have any proof. What do you have? Not very much, Winter said, tucking the blanket carefully around Jason. Really only a short conversation with her when I was escorting her up from the medical section. She asked me what I did during the height of the rebellion, and I told her about my job with supply and procurement. She then identified me as Targeter. Leia fought back. Winter had had so many codenames during that time. Was that incorrect? No, I had that name for a short time, Winter said. Which is the point, really. I was only known as Targeter for a few weeks on Avaram, before Imperial intelligence broke the cell there. I see, Leia said slowly. And Mara wasn't with the Avarists? I don't know, Winter said, shaking her head. I never met more than a few of that group. That's why I've been searching the records. I thought there might be a complete listing somewhere. I doubt it, Leia said. Local cells like that almost never kept personal files. It would be a group death warrant if it fell into Imperial hands. I know, Winter looked across the crib at her, which rather leaves us at an impasse. Perhaps, Leia said, gazing past Winter and trying to pull together everything she knew about Mara. It wasn't all that much. As far as she knew, Mara had never claimed any past Alliance affiliation, which would tend to support Winter's suspicions. On the other hand, it had been less than 2 months since she'd enlisted Luke to help her free card from a detention cell on Grand Admiral Thrawn's own flagship. That didn't make much sense if she was an Imperial agent herself. I think, she told Winter slowly, that whatever side Mara was once on, she's not there anymore. Any loyalty she has now is probably to Card and his people. Winter smiled faintly. Is that Jedi insight, Your Highness, or just your trained diplomatic opinion? Some of each, Leia said. I don't think we have anything to fear from her. I hope you're right, Winter gestured. Shall I put Jaina to bed now? Leia looked down. Jaina's eyes were closed tightly, her tiny mouth making soft sucking motions at the empty air. Yes, thank you, she said, giving her daughter's cheek one final caress. Is that reception from the Sarkhan delegation still going on downstairs? She asked as she rolled away from Jaina and stretched cramped muscles. It was when I passed by, Winter said, picking Jaina up and setting her in the crib next to Jason. Mon Mothma asked me to suggest you drop in for a few minutes if you had the chance. Yes, I'll bet she did, Leia said, getting off the bed and crossing to the wardrobe. One of the little side benefits of having twin infants on her hands was that she finally had an armor-plated excuse for getting out of these superficial government functions, but always seemed to take up more time than they were worth. Now here was Mon Mothma trying to chicane her way back into that whole crazy runaround again, and I'm sorry to have to disappoint her, she added, but I'm afraid I have something more urgent to do right now. Will you watch the twins for me? Certainly, Winter said. May I ask where you'll be? From the wardrobe, Leia selected something more suitable for public wear than her dressing gown and started to change. I'm going to see what I can find out about Mara Jade's past, she said. She could sense Winter's frown all the way across the room. May I ask how? Leia smiled tightly. I'm going to ask her. He stood before her, his face half hidden by the cowl of his robe, his yellow eyes piercingly bright as they gazed across the infinite distance between them. His lips moved, but his words were drowned out by the throaty hooting of alarms all around them, filling Mara with an urgency that was rapidly edging into panic. Between her and the Emperor 2 figures appeared, the dark imposing figure of Darth Vader and the smaller black-clad figure of Luke Skywalker. They stood before the Emperor, facing each other, and ignited their lightsabers. The blades crossed, brilliant red-white against brilliant green-white, and they prepared for battle. And then, without warning, the blades disengaged, and with twin wars of hatred audible even over the alarms, both turned and strode toward the Emperor. Mara heard herself cry out as she struggled to rush to her master's aid, but the distance was too great, her body too sluggish. She screamed a challenge, trying to at least distract them, but neither Vader nor Skywalker seemed to hear her. They moved outward to flank the Emperor, and as they lifted their lightsabers high, she saw that the Emperor was gazing at her. She looked back at him, wanting desperately to turn away from the coming disaster, but unable to move. 1,000 thoughts and emotions flooded in through that gaze, a glittering kaleidoscope of pain and fear and rage that spun far too fast for her to really absorb. The Emperor raised his hand, sending cascades of jagged blue-white lightning at his enemies. Both men struggled under the counterattack, and Mara watched with the sudden agonized hope that this time it might end differently. But no, Vader and Skywalker straightened, and with another roar of rage they lifted their lightsabers high, and then over the raised lightsabers came a roll of distant thunder. With a jerk that nearly threw her out of her chair, Mara snapped out of the dream. She took a deep, shuddering breath against the flood of post-dream emotion, against the turmoil of pain, anger, and loneliness. But this time she wasn't going to have the luxury of working her way through the tangle in solitude. From outside her room she could vaguely sense another presence, even as she rolled out of the desk chair into a reflexive combat crouch. The roll of thunder from her dream, a quiet knock, was repeated. For a long moment she considered keeping quiet and seeing if whoever it was would decide the room was empty and go away. But the light from her room, she knew, would be visible beneath the old-style hinged door, and if the person out there was who she suspected, he wouldn't be fooled by silence anyway. "Come in," she called. The door unlocked and swung open, but it wasn't Luke Skywalker who stood there. "Hello, Mara," Leia Organa Solo nodded to her. "Am I interrupting anything?" "Not at all," Mara said politely, suppressing a grimace. The last thing she wanted right now was company, particularly company that was in any way associated with Skywalker. But as long as she and Gent were still stuck here, it wouldn't be smart to deliberately alienate someone of Organa Solo's influence. "I was just reading some of the news reports from the battle regions." "Please come in." "Thank you," Organa Solo said, stepping past her into the suite. "I was looking over those same reports a little while ago. Grand Admiral Thrawn is certainly justifying the late Emperor's confidence in his ability." Mara threw her a sharp look, wondering what Skywalker had told her. But Organa Solo's eyes were turned toward the window and the lights of the Imperial city below. What little Mara could discern of the other woman's sense didn't seem to be taunting. "Yes, Thrawn was one of the best," she said. "Brilliant and innovative, with an almost compulsive thirst for victory. Perhaps he needs to prove he was the equal of the other Grand Admirals," Organa Solo suggested, "particularly given his mixed heritage and the Emperor's feelings toward non-humans." "I'm sure that was part of it," Mara said. Organa Solo took another step toward the window, her back still turned to Mara. "Did you know the Grand Admiral well?" she asked. "Not really," Mara said cautiously. "He communicated with Card a few times when I was there and visited our Mirka base once. He had a big business going in Mirka, yes, Alamiri for a while. Card once figured they'd hauled 5,000 or 6,000 of them out of there. I meant, did you know him during the war?" Organa Solo said, turning finally to face her. Mara turned her gaze steadily. If Skywalker had told her... But if he told her, why wasn't Mara in a detention cell somewhere? No, Organa Solo had to be on a fishing expedition. "Why should I have known Thrawn during the war?" she countered. Organa Solo shrugged fractionally. "There's been a suggestion made that you might have once have served with the Empire, and you wanted to make sure before you locked me up. I wanted to see if you might have knowledge about the Grand Admiral we could use against him," Organa Solo corrected. Mara snorted. "There isn't anything," she said. "Not with Thrawn. He has no patterns, no favourite strategies, no discernible weaknesses. He studies his enemies and tailors his attacks against psychological blind spots. He doesn't overcommit his forces, and he's not too proud to back off when it's clear he's losing, which doesn't happen very often, as you're finding out. She cocked an eyebrow. Any of that help you? She added sarcastically. Actually, it does, Organa said. If we can identify the weaknesses he's planning to exploit, we might be able to anticipate the thrust of his attack. That's not going to be easy, Mara warned. Organa smiled faintly. No, but it gives us a place to start. Thank you for your help. You're welcome, Mara said, words coming out automatically. Was there anything else? No, I don't think so, Organa said, stepping away from the window and heading for the door. I need to get back and get some sleep before the twins wake up again, and you'll probably want to be going to bed soon, too. And I'm still free to move around the palace? Organa smiled again. Of course. Whatever you did in the past, it's clear you're not serving with the Empire now. Good night. She turned to the door, reached for the handle. I'm going to kill your brother, Mara told her. Did he tell you that? Organa stiffened, just noticeably, and Mara could sense the ripple of shock run through that Jedi-trained calmness. Her hand on the door handle dropped back to her side. No, he didn't, she said, her back still to Mara. May I ask why? He destroyed my life, Mara told her, feeling the old ache deep in her throat and wondering why she was even telling Organa this. You're wrong. I didn't just serve with the Empire. I was a personal agent of the Emperor himself. He brought me here to Coruscant in the Imperial Palace and trained me to be an extension of his will across the galaxy. I could hear his voice from anywhere in the Empire and knew how to give his orders to anyone from a stormtrooper brigade all the way up to a Grand Moff. I had authority and power and a purpose in life. They knew me as the Emperor's hand, and they respected me the same way they did him. Your brother took all that away from me. Organa turned back to face her. I'm sorry, she said, but there was no other choice. The lives and freedom of billions of beings. I'm not going to debate the issue with you, Mara cut her off. You couldn't possibly understand what I've been through. A shadow of distant pain crossed Organa face. You're wrong, she said quietly. I understand very well. Mara glared at her, but it was a glare without any real force of hatred behind it. Leia Organa of Alderaan, who'd been forced to watch as the first Death Star liberated her entire world. At least you had a life to go to afterward, she growled at last. You had the whole rebellion. More friends and allies than you could even count. I had no one. It must have been hard. I survived it, Mara said briefly. So now are you going to have me hauled off to detention? Those Alderaanian cultured eyebrows lifted slightly. You keep suggesting that I should have you locked up. Is that what you want? I already told you what I want. I want to kill your brother. Do you? Organa asked. Do you really? Mara smiled thinly. Bring him here and I'll prove it. Organa studied her face, and Mara could feel the tenuous touch of her rudimentary Jedi senses as well. From what Luke's told me, it sounds like you've already had several chances to kill him, Organa pointed out. You didn't take them. It wasn't from lack of intent, Mara said. But it was a thought that had been gnawing at her as well. I just keep getting into situations where I need him alive. But that'll change. Perhaps, Organa said, her eyes still moving across Mara's face. Perhaps it's not really you who wants him dead. Mara frowned. What's that supposed to mean? Organa gaze drifted away from Mara to the window, and Mara could feel a tightening of the other woman's sense. I was at Endor a couple of months ago, she said. An icy sensation crawled up Mara's spine. She'd been at Endor too, taken there to face Grand Admiral Thrawn, and she remembered what the space around the world of the Emperor's death had felt like. And? She prompted. Even to herself, her voice sounded strained. Organa heard it too. You know what I'm talking about, don't you? She asked, her eyes still on the lights of the Imperial City. There's some shadow of the Emperor's presence still there. Some of that final surge of hatred and anger, like I don't know what, like an emotional bloodstain, Mara said quietly, the image springing spontaneously and vividly into her mind, marking the spot where he died. She looked at Organa to find the other woman's eyes on her. Yes, Organa said, that's exactly what it was like. Mara took a deep breath, forcing the black chill from her mind. So what does that have to do with me? Organa studied her. I think you know. You will kill Luke Skywalker. No, Mara said, her mouth suddenly dry. You're wrong. Am I? Organa asked softly. You said you could hear the Emperor's voice from anywhere in the galaxy. I could hear his voice, Mara snapped. Nothing more. Organa shrugged slightly. You know best, of course. It might still be worth thinking about. I'll do that, Mara said stiffly. If that's all, you can go. Organa nodded, her sense showing no irritation at being dismissed like some minor underling. Thank you for your assistance, she said. I'll talk with you later. With a final smile, she pulled the door open and left. Don't count on it. Mara muttered after her, turning back to her desk and dropping into the chair. This had gone far enough. If Card was too preoccupied with business to get in touch with his contact man, then the contact man himself was going to get her and Gent out of here. Pulling up her code file, she keyed for long-range comm access. The response was prompt. Unable to access, the words scrolled across her display. Long-range communication system temporarily down. Terrific, she growled under her breath. How soon till it's back up? Unable to determine. Repeating. Long-range communication system temporarily down. With a curse, she shut the terminal off. The whole universe seemed to be against her tonight. She picked up the datapad she'd been reading earlier, put it down again, and stood back up. It was late. She'd already fallen asleep once at her desk, and if she had any sense, she would just give it up and go to bed. Stepping across to the window, she leaned against the carved wooden frame and gazed out at the city lights stretching halfway to infinity, and tried to think. No, it was impossible. Impossible, absurd, and unthinkable. Organasola could waste as much breath as she wanted, spinning these clever speculations of hers. After 5 years of living with this thing, Mara ought to know her own thoughts and feelings, ought to know what was real and what wasn't. And yet, the image of the dream rose up before her. The Emperor, gazing at her with bitter intensity as Vader and Skywalker closed in on him, the unspoken but tangible accusation in those yellow eyes, that it was her failure to take care of Skywalker at Jabba the Hutt's hideout that had caused this, that flood of powerless rage as the two lightsabers were lifted over him, that final cry, ringing forever through her head, "You will kill Luke Skywalker! Stop it!" she snarled, slapping the side of her head hard against the window jamb. The image and words exploded into a flash of pain and a shower of sparks and vanished. For a long time she just stood there, listening to the rapid thudding of her heartbeat in her ears, the conflicting thoughts chasing each other around her mind. Certainly the Emperor would have wanted Skywalker dead, but Organasola was still wrong. She had to be. It was Mara herself who wanted to kill Luke Skywalker, not some ghost from the past. Far across the city, a multicolored light rippled gently across against the surrounding buildings and clouds overhead, jolting her out of her musings. The clock at the ancient central gathering hall, marking the hour as it had for the past 3 centuries. The light changed texture and rippled again, then winked out. Half an hour past midnight, lost in her thoughts, Mara hadn't realized it had gotten that late. And all of this wasn't accomplishing anything anyway. She might as well go to bed and try to put the whole thing out of her mind long enough to get some sleep. With a sigh, she pushed away from the window and froze. Deep in the back of her mind, the quiet alarm bell had just gone off. Somewhere nearby there was danger. She slid her tiny blaster out of its forearm holster, listening hard. Nothing. Glancing back once at the window, wondering briefly if anyone was watching her through the privacy laminate, she moved silently to the door. Putting her ear against it, she listened again. For a moment there was nothing. Then, almost inaudible through the thick wood, she heard the sound of approaching footsteps. Footsteps of the kind of quiet but purposeful stride that she had always associated with combat professionals. She tensed, but the footsteps passed her door without pausing, fading away toward the far end of the hallway. She waited a count of 10 to let them get a good lead on her. Then, carefully, she opened her door and looked outside. There were 4 of them, dressed in the uniforms of palace security, walking in a bent diamond formation. They reached the hallway and slowed as the point man eased a quick look around it. His hand curved slightly, and all 4 continued around the corner and disappeared. Heading toward the stairway that led down to the central sections of the palace below, up to the tower and the permanent residential suites above, Mara stared after them, her fatigue gone in a surge of adrenaline. The bent diamond formation, the obvious caution, the hand signal, and her own premonition of danger, they all pointed to the same conclusion. Imperial intelligence had penetrated the palace. She turned back toward her desk, stopped short with a quiet curse. One of the first tasks the team would have carried out would have been to get into the palace's computer and comm systems. Any attempt to sound the alarm would probably be intercepted, and would certainly tip them off. Which meant that if they were going to be stopped, she was going to have to do it herself. Gripping her blaster tightly, she slipped out of her room and headed after them. She'd made it to the corner and was just easing forward for a careful look when she heard the quiet click of a blaster safety behind her. "All right, Jade," a voice murmured in her ear. "Nice and easy. It's all over." Admiral Drayson leaned back in his seat and shook his head. "I'm sorry, Calrissian, General Beliblis," he said for probably the 10th time since the session had begun. "We just can't risk it." Lando took a deep breath, trying to scrape together a few last shards of patience. This is his sweat and work that Drayson was casually throwing away. "Admiral, it's not that much of a risk, Admiral," Beliblis cut in smoothly and with far more courtesy than Lando had left at his disposal. "I've shown you at least 8 places we could draw an assault frigate from which it would have it out of service less than 10 days. Drayson snorted. "At the rate he's going, Grand Admiral Thrawn could take 3 more sectors in 10 days. You want to give him a shot at 4? Admiral, we're taking a single assault frigate here, Lando said. Not a dozen star cruisers or an orbital battle station. What could Thrawn possibly have up his sleeve where one assault frigate could make or break the attack? What could he do against a heavily defended shipyard with a single rigged freighter? Trayson retorted. Face it, gentlemen, when you go up against someone like Thrawn, all the usual rules get tossed out the lock. He could spin a net out of this so transparent that we'd never even see it until it was too late. He's done it before. Lando grimaced, but it was hardly a frame of mind he could really blame Trayson for. A couple of months back, when he and Han had first been brought to Bel Iblis's hidden military base, he'd been three-quarters convinced himself that the whole thing was some gigantic and convoluted scheme that Thrawn had created for their benefit. It had taken him until after the Katana battle to finally be convinced otherwise, and it had taught him a valuable lesson. Admiral, we all agree that Thrawn is a brilliant tactician, he said, choosing his words carefully, but we can't assume that everything that happens in the galaxy is part of some grand all-encompassing scheme that he's dreamed up. He's got my metal stockpiles and put Nomad City out of commission. Odds are that's all he wanted. Drayson shook his head. I'm afraid odds are isn't good enough, Calrissian. You find me proof that the Empire won't take advantage of a missing assault frigate, and I'll consider loaning you one. Oh, come on, Admiral, and if I were you, Drayson added, starting to gather his data cards together, I'd play down my connection with the whole Nuklon mining project. A lot of us still remember that it was your mole miners Thrawn used in his attack on the Sluisvan shipyards, and it was his knowledge of them that kept that attack from succeeding. Bel Iblis reminded the other quietly. A number of us remember that, too. That assumes Thrawn actually intended to steal the ships. Trayson shot back as he stood up from the table. Personally, I expect he was just as happy to have them put out of commission. Now, if you'll excuse me, gentlemen, I have a water run. He left and Lando let out a quiet sigh of defeat. So much for that, he said, pulling his own data cards together. Don't let it worry you, Bel Iblis advised, getting up from his chair and stretching tiredly. It's not you and Nomad City so much as it is me. Trayson was always one of those who considered disagreement with Mon Mothma to be one step down from Imperial collaboration. Obviously he still does. I thought you and Mon Mothma have patched all that up, Lando said, getting to his feet. Oh, we have, Bel Iblis shrugged, circling the table and heading for the door. More or less. He's invited me back into the New Republic. I've accepted her leadership, and officially all is well. But old memories fade slowly. His lip twisted slightly, and I have to admit that my departure from the Alliance after Alderaan could have been handled more diplomatically. You up on the President's guests for? Yes. You? The same. Come on, I'll walk you up. They left the conference room and headed down the arched hallway toward the turbo lifts. You think he might change his mind? Lando asked. Trayson? Bel Iblis shook his head. Not a chance. Unless you can pry Mon Mothma out of the war room and get you a hearing, I think your only chance is to hope Akbar gets back to Coruscant in the next couple of days. The importance of Nomad City aside, I imagine he still owes you a favour or two. Lando thought about that rather awkward scene back when he first told Akbar that he was resigning his general's commission. Favours won't mean anything if he agrees that it might be a setup, he said instead, not after being burned once at Sluisvan. True, Bel Iblis conceded. He glanced down across corridor as they passed. When he turned forward again, Lando thought he could see a slight frown on his face, all of which is unfortunately complicated by the presence of this Delta Source thing the Empire's got planted here in the palace. Just because Thrawn doesn't have any current plans for Nuklon doesn't mean he won't fix some up once he finds out what we're going to do. If he finds out, Lando corrected. Delta Source isn't omniscient, you know. Han and Leia have managed to run some important missions past it, proving once again the basic strength of small groups. Still, the sooner you identify this leak and put it out of commission, the better. They passed another hallway, and again Bel Iblis glanced down it, and this time there was no doubt about the frown. Trouble? Lando asked quietly. I'm not sure, Bel Iblis said. Shouldn't there be occasional guards in this part of the palace? Lando looked around. They were rather alone out here. Could they all have been shifted down to the Sarkin reception for the evening? They were here earlier, Bel Iblis said. I saw at least two when I came down from my suite. Lando looked back along the hallway, an unpleasant sensation starting to crawl along his backbone. So what happened to them? I don't know. Bel Iblis took a deep breath. I don't suppose you're armed? Lando shook his head. Blasters up in my room. I didn't think I'd need it here. You probably don't, Bel Iblis said, the fingertips of his right hand easing beneath his jacket as he looked around. There's probably some simple, perfectly innocent, innocuous explanation. Sure, Lando said, pulling out his comlink. Let's call in and find out what it is. He thumbed the device on, and as quickly shut it off as a soft squeal of static erupted from the speaker. I think the explanation just stopped being simple, he said grimly. Suddenly his hand was itching to have a blaster in it. What now? We find some way to alert palace security, Bel Iblis said, looking around. All right, the turbo lifts up ahead won't help us. They only serve the residential areas, but there's a stairway at the far end that leads down to Palace Central. We'll try that way. Sounds good, Lando nodded. Let's swing up to my suite first and pick up my blaster. Good idea, Beliblis agreed. We'll pass on the turbo lift. Stairs are over this way. Nice and quiet. The stairs were as deserted as the corridor behind them had been, but as Beliblis started out of the stairway door, he suddenly held up a warning hand. Moving to his side, Lando looked out onto the floor. Ahead, moving cautiously down the hallway away from them, was a lone figure, a slender woman with red gold hair, a small blaster gripped ready in her hand. Mara Jade. There was a soft whisper of metal on cloth as Beliblis drew his blaster. Motioning Lando to follow, he started silently down the hallway after her. They had nearly caught up by the time she reached the far corner. There she paused, poised to look around it. Beliblis leveled his blaster. All right, Jade, he said quietly. Nice and easy. It's all over. For a second, Lando was sure she was going to argue the point. She turned her head halfway, looking back over her shoulder as if targeting her opponents. Calrissian, she said. There was no mistaking the relief in her voice, or the underlying tension either. There are Imperials in the palace, dressed as security. I've just seen 4 of them. Interesting, Beliblis said, eyeing her closely. Where are you going? I thought it might be a good idea to find out what they were up to, she growled sarcastically. You want to help or not? Beliblis seized to look around the corner. I don't see anyone. They've probably already headed down. Best guess is either the war room or the Sarkin reception. And suddenly the whole thing clicked together in Lando's mind. No, he said. They haven't gone down. They've gone up. They're off to Leia's twins. Mara swore under her breath. You're right. Thrawn's promised them to that lunatic Sabaoth. That has to be it. You could be right, Beliblis said. Where's your room, Calrissian? 2 doors back, Lando told him, nodding over his shoulder. Get your blaster, Beliblis ordered, peering again around the corner. You and Jade head down the hallway over there and find the main stairway. See if anyone's up there yet. Maybe try to warn Leia and Solo. I'll go downstairs and scare up some reinforcements. Be careful, they may have left a rear guard on the stairway down, Mara warned. They'll certainly have one on the way up, Beliblis countered. Watch yourselves. With one final look around the corner, he eased past and was gone. Wait here, Lando told Mara, starting back toward his room. I'll be right back. Just hurry it up, she called after him. Right. He ran to his room, and as he kept the door open, he threw a quick look back at Mara. She was still standing there, turned halfway around the corner, an intense yet strangely empty expression on the part of her face he could see. That face. That somehow, somewhere familiar face. Fitting into a time and place and background he could almost but not quite make out in his mind's eye. He shook off the thought. Whoever she had been now was definitely not the time to try and figure it out. Han, Leia, and their children were in deadly danger, and it was up to him and Mara to get them out of it. Turning back to his room, he hurried inside. Leia Organa Solo. Leia Organa Solo. Wake up. You're in danger. Wake up. Leia Organa Solo. Wake up. With a gasp, Leia snapped out of the dream, the last remnants of that insistent voice echoing through her mind as she came awake. For a handful of dream-fogged heartbeats, she couldn't remember where she was, and her eyes and Jedi senses flicked tensely around the darkened room as she struggled for recognition. Then the last of the sleep evaporated, and she was back in her suite in the Imperial Palace. Beside her, Han grunted gently in his sleep as he rolled over. Across the room, the twins were huddled together in their crib. In the next room over, Winter was also asleep, no doubt dreaming in the laser-sharp images of her perfect memory. And outside the suite, she frowned. There was someone at the outer door. No, more than one, 5 or 6 of them at least, standing grouped around it. She slipped out of bed, hands automatically scooping up her blaster and lightsaber from the floor as she did so. It was probably nothing, most likely simply a group of security guards taking a moment for idle conversation among themselves before continuing on their rounds. Though if so, they were breaking several fairly strict rules about on-duty personnel. She would have to find a diplomatic but firm way of reminding them. Patting silently on the thick carpet, she left the bedroom and headed across the living areas toward the door, working through the Jedi sensory enhancement routine as she walked. If she could hear and identify the guards' voices from inside the suite, she could warn them individually and privately in the morning. She never made it to the door. Halfway across the living area, she stopped short as her enhanced hearing began to pick up a faint hum coming from ahead of her. She strained her ears, trying to ignore the sudden distraction of her own heartbeat as she listened. The sound was faint but very distinctive, and she knew she'd heard it somewhere before. And then abruptly she had it, the hum of an electronic lock breaker. Someone was trying to break into their suite. Even as she stood there, frozen with shock, the lock clicked open. There was no time to run and nowhere to run to. But the designers of the tower hadn't been blind to this sort of danger. Lifting her blaster, hoping fervently the mechanism still worked, Leia fired 2 quick shots into the door. The wood was one of the hardest and strongest known in the galaxy, and her shots probably didn't gouge their way more than a quarter of the way through, but it was enough. The embedded sensors had taken note of the attack, and even as the sound of the blasts thundered in layers and enhanced hearing, the heavy metal security door slammed down along the wooden door's inside edge. "Leia?" Han's voice demanded from behind her, sounding distant through the ringing in her ears. "Someone's trying to break in," she said, turning and hurrying back to where he stood in the bedroom doorway, blaster ready in his hand. "I got the security door closed in time, but that won't hold them." "Not for long," Han agreed, eyeing the door as Leia reached him. "Get in the bedroom and call security. I'll see what I can do about slowing them down." "All right, be careful. They're serious about this." The words were barely out of her mouth when the whole room seemed to shake. The intruders, abandoning subtlety, had set to work blowing the outer door to splinters. "Yeah, I'd call that serious," Han seconded grimly. "Get Winter and 3PO and grab the twins. We got some fast planning to do." The first sound that drifted down the delicate arch of the tower staircase might have been a distant blaster shot. Mara couldn't tell for sure. The next one, a handful of seconds later, left no doubt. "Uh-oh," Calrissian muttered. "That's trouble." Another shot echoed down the staircase. "Sounds like a heavy blaster," Mara said, listening hard. "They must not have been able to get the door open quietly." "Or else they only want the twins," Calrissian countered darkly, heaving himself away from the corner they'd paused at. "Come on, hold it," Mara said, grabbing his arm with her free hand as she studied the territory in front of them. The wide arch of the first flight of stairs ended at a presentation landing with an elaborate wrought stone balustrade. Just visible from where they stood were the openings of two narrower stairways that continued upward double helix fashion from opposite ends of the landing. That landing would be a good spot for a rearguard, and I don't feel like stopping a blaster bolt. Calrissian muttered something impatient sounding under his breath, and he stayed put. A moment later he was probably glad he had. "You're right. There's someone near the stairway to the left," he murmured. "Means there'll be one on the right too," Mara said, her eyes searching the contours and crevices of the balustrade stonework as another blaster shot echoed down. "Intelligence operatives like lurking in shadows, and there's one on each side of the main stairway," she added, "about 2 meters out from the edges." "I see them," Calrissian said. "This isn't going to be easy." He looked back over his shoulder to where the stairway picked up again. "Come on, Billy Bliss, get up here." "He'd better hurry," Mara seconded, peering cautiously at the 4 Imperials and trying to remember the details of the tower's layout. "Organa Solo's door isn't going to last long." "Not nearly as long as that rearguard can hold us off," Calrissian agreed, hissing softly between his teeth. "Wait a minute. Stay here. I've got an idea." "Where are you going?" Mara demanded as he moved away from the corner. "Main hangar," Calrissian told her, heading for the stairway behind them. "Chewie was down there earlier working on the Falcon. If he's still there, we can go up to the outside of the tower and get them out." "How?" Mara persisted. "Those are transparent steel windows up there. You never blast through them without killing everyone inside." "I won't have to," Calrissian said with a tightly sly smile. "Leia's got a lightsaber. Keep these guys busy, okay?" He sprinted to the stairway and vanished down it. "Right," Mara growled after him, turning her attention back to the Imperials up on the stairway. "Have they spotted her and Calrissian skulking around down here?" "Probably. In which case that guy at the leftmost stairway was probably standing too far out of cover just to bait her." Well, she was willing to oblige. Switching her blaster to her left hand, she braced her wrist against the corner, took careful aim. The shot from the other stairway spattered off the wall above her blaster, scattering hot splinters of stone across her hand. "Blast!" she snarled, snatching her hand back and brushing the fragments off. "So they wanted to play cute, did they?" Fine, she could handle cute. Getting a fresh grip on her blaster, she eased back to the corner. It was a sudden tinkle of danger in the back of her mind that saved her life. She dropped to one knee, and as she did so, a pair of blaster shots from straight ahead flashed into the stonework to where her head had been. Instantly, she threw herself backward to land on her side on the floor, eyes and blaster tracking toward where the shots had come from. There were 2 of them, moving quietly toward her along the corridor on the opposite side of the stairway. She got off 2 quick shots as she rolled over onto her stomach, both of them missing. Shifting to a 2-handed grip, trying to ignore the shots that were beginning to come uncomfortably close, she lined up her blaster on the rightmost of her assailants and fired twice. He jerked and collapsed to the floor, his blaster still firing reflexively and uselessly into the ceiling. A shot sizzled past Mara's ear as she shifted aim toward the second assailant. Another came even closer as his weapon tracked toward her, and abruptly the air over Mara's head was filled with a blazing storm of blaster fire. The Imperial across the way went down like a stuck banther and lay still. Mara twisted around. A half-dozen security guards were hurrying toward her from the lower staircase, weapons at the ready. Behind them was Bailey Bliss. "You all right?" he called to her. "I'm fine," she grunted, rolling further back from the corner. Just in time, the Imperials on the landing, their little surprise attack having fizzled, opened fire in full force. Mara got to her feet, ducking away from the rain of stone chips. "Calrissian's gone down to the hangar," she told Bailey Bliss, raising her voice over the din. Yes, we passed him on the way up, the other nodded as the security guards hurried forward. What happened here? Couple of latecomers to the party, Mara told him, jerking her head back toward the corridor, probably on their way back from the comms section. Their friends on the landing tried to keep my attention while they sneaked up on me. Just about worked, too. I'm glad it didn't, Beliblis said, shifting his attention over her shoulder. Lieutenant, not going to be easy, sir, the guard commander called over the noise. We've got an E-Web repeating blaster on its way up from the armory. As soon as it gets here, we can cut them right off that landing. Until then, about all we can do is keep them busy and hope they do something stupid. Beliblis nodded so lowly, his lips compressed into a tight line, a hint of strain around his eyes. It was a look Mara had seen only rarely, and been only on the faces of the best military commanders, the expression of a leader preparing to send men to their deaths. We can't wait, he said. The strain was still there, but his voice was firm. The group upstairs will have Solo's door open well before that. We'll have to take them now. The guard commander took a deep breath. Understood, sir. Right, men, you heard the general. Let's find ourselves some cover and get to it. Mara took a step closer to Beliblis. They'll never do it in time, she said quietly. I know that, the other said tightly. But the more we can take out now, the fewer we'll have to deal with when the rest of them come downstairs. His gaze shifted again over her shoulder. When, he added softly, they have hostages. There was one final stutter of heavy blaster fire, a vaguely metallic crash, and then silence. Oh dear, 3PO moaned from the corner where he was trying to make himself as inconspicuous as possible. I believe the front security door has failed. Glad you're here to tell us these things, Han said irritably, his eyes roving restlessly around Winter's bedroom. It was so much useless exercise, Leia knew. Everything they could possibly use in their defense had already been moved into position. Winter's bed and memento chest were against the two doors leading out of here, and the wardrobe had been moved near the window and tipped on its side to serve as a makeshift firing barricade, and that was it. Till the intruders broke through one or both of the doors, there was nothing to do but wait. Leia took a deep breath, trying to calm her racing heart. Ever since the first of these kidnapping attempts on Bimisari, she'd been able to think of it as the Imperials gunning for her and her alone. Not an especially pleasant thought, but one that she'd become more or less accustomed to after years of warfare. This time it was different. This time, instead of being after her and her unborn twins, they were after her babies. Babies they could physically take from her arms and hide away, where she might never see them again. She squeezed her lightsaber tightly. No, it was not going to happen. She wouldn't let it. There was a vaguely wooden-sounding crash from outside. There goes the couch, Han muttered. Another crash. And the chair. Didn't think they would slow him down any. It was worth a try, Leia said. Yeah, Han snorted under his breath. You know, I've been telling you for months we needed more furniture in this place. Leia smiled tightly and squeezed his hand. Trust Han to try to take the edge off in a tense situation. You have not, she told him. You'll never hear anyway. She looked back at Winter, sitting on the floor beneath the transparent steel windows, if one twin cradled in each arm. How are they doing? I think they're waking up, Winter murmured back. Yes, they are, Leia confirmed, giving each baby a quick mental caress of as much reassurance as she could manage. Try to keep them quiet, Han muttered. Our pals out there don't need any help. Leia nodded, feeling a fresh tension squeezing her heart. Both bedrooms, theirs and Winter's, opened out into the living area of the suite, giving the attackers a 50-50 chance of picking the door their targets were hiding behind. With the kind of weaponry they obviously had, a wrong choice wouldn't lose them more than a few minutes, but a few minutes could easily mean the difference between life and death. The thud of heavy blaster shot came through the wall from the direction of their room, and for a moment Leia began to breathe again, but only for a moment. A second later the sound was repeated, this time from the door in front of them. Faced with two doors, the Imperials had decided to break down both. She turned to Han to find him looking at her. It'll still slow them down, he reminded her, the words more soothing than the sense behind them. They have to split up their firepower. We've still got some time. Now if we just had something to do with it, Leia said, looking futilely around the room. Years of moving around the galaxy of the Rebellion supply and procurement section had gotten Winter into the habit of travelling light, and there simply wasn't anything else in here that they could use. Another volley of shots came from outside, followed by a faint splintering sound. The regular wooden bedroom doors would be down soon, leaving only the inner security doors. Leia looked around the room again, desperation starting to cloud her thoughts. The wardrobe, the bed, the memento chest, that was it. Nothing but the security doors, the transparent steel windows, and bare walls. Bare walls. She was suddenly and freshly aware of the lightsaber clutched in her hand. Han, why don't we just get out of here, she said, the first cautious wisp of hope flicking through her. I can cut us through the wall to the next suite, however, with my lightsaber. We wouldn't have to stop there. We could be halfway down the corridor before they get that door down. Yeah, I already thought of that, Han said tightly. Problem is, they probably thought of it too. Leia swallowed. Yes, the Imperials would certainly be ready for them to try that. How about going down then? She persisted. Or up? Do you think they'd be ready for us to go through the ceiling? You've seen Thrawn in action, Han countered. What do you think? Leia sighed, the brief glint of hope fading. He was right. If the Grand Admiral had planned this attack personally, they might as well open the security door and surrender right now. Everything they could possibly come up with would already have been anticipated in exquisite detail, with counters planned for each move. She shook her head sharply. "No," she said aloud. "He's not infallible. We've outfought him before, and we can do it again." She turned around to look at Winter and the twins, still sleeping under the window. "The window. All right," she said slowly. "What if we go out the window?" He stared at her. "Out the window to where?" "Wherever we can get to," she said. "The blasters outside are pounding at the security doors now. Up, down, sideways, I don't care." Hans still had that astonished look on his face. "Sweetheart, in case you hadn't noticed, those walls are flat stone. Even Chewie couldn't climb it without mountain gear. That's why they won't expect us to go that way," Leia said, glancing at the window again. "Maybe I can carve out some hand and footholds with the lightsaber." She stopped, giving the window a second look. It hadn't been a trick of the room's lighting. There were indeed a pair of headlights approaching. "Han!" He swiveled to look. "Uh-oh," he muttered. "More company. Great. Could it be a rescue team?" Leia suggested hesitantly. "Doubt it." Han shook his head, studying the approaching lights. "It's only been a few minutes since the shooting started." "Wait a minute." Leia looked back. Outside, the headlights had begun to flicker. She watched the pattern, trying unsuccessfully to match it with any code she knew. "Captain Solo," 3PO spoke up, sounding excited. "As you know, I am fluent in over 6 million forms of communication. It's Chewie!" Han cut him off, scrambling to his feet and waving both hands in front of the window. "And this signal appears to be related to one of the codes used by professional Sabbac players when dealing with..." "We've got to get rid of this window," Han said, throwing a look back at the door. "Leia?" "Right." Leia dropped her blaster and scrambled to her feet, lightsaber in hand. "Cheating by total fourth parties to the game." "Shut up, Goldenrod." Han snapped at 3PO, helping Winter and the twins out from under the window. The lights outside were getting rapidly closer, and now Leia could make out the faint shape of the Falcon in the backwash of light from the city lights below. A memory flickered back. The Noghri kidnapping attempt on Bafash had used a fake Falcon as a lure, but the Imperials wouldn't have fought to use a Sabbac player's code. Would they? It almost didn't matter. She would rather face enemies aboard a ship than sit here waiting for them to walk in on her like this. And well before they got on board, she sought to be able to sense whether it was Chewbacca out there or not. Stepping to the window, she ignited her lightsaber and raised it high, and behind her, with a final explosive crash, the security door blew in. Leia spun around, catching a brief glimpse through the smoke and sparks of two men pushing aside the memento chest and diving to the floor as Han grabbed her arm and yanked her to the floor. A covering volley of blaster fire spattered against the wall and window as she shut down her lightsaber and scooped up her blaster again. At her side, Han was already returning fire, ignoring the danger as he crouched half protected by the wardrobe. 4 more Imperials were at the doorway now, adding their contribution to the rapid splintering of the wardrobe. Leia clenched her teeth, firing back as well as long practice and the Force would let her. Knowing full well how futile it was, the longer this firefight went on, the greater the chance that a stray shot would hit one of her babies. And suddenly, unexpectedly, something touched her mind, a mental pressure, half suggestion, half demand, and what it told her. She took a deep breath. "Stop!" she shouted over the din. "Stop shooting! We surrender!" The firing hesitated, then came to a halt. Laying her blaster on top of the shattered wardrobe, she raised her hands as the 2 Imperials on the floor got cautiously to their feet and started forward, and tried to ignore Han's stunned disbelief. The balustrade near the rightmost stairway erupted in a cloud of chips and stone dust as the concentrated fire of the security guards finally broke through it. The answering fire from the landing caught one of the guards as the balustrade collapsed, sending him flopping backward to lie still. Mara eased an inconspicuous eye around the corner, peering through the debris and the blinding flashes of blaster bolts, wondering if in all the mess they'd managed to take out the Imperial they were trying for. They had. Through the clearing smoke she could make out the shape of a body, scorched and dust-covered. "They got one," she reported, turning back to Bel Iblis. "Free to go. Plus, however many there are upstairs," he reminded her, his face grim. "Let's hope the legendary Solo luck extends to Leia and the babies and anyone else up there they take hostage." "That's the second time you've mentioned hostages," Mara said. Bel Iblis shrugged. "A hostage screen is their only way out of here," he said, "and I'm sure they know it. Their only other option is to go up, and I've already told Calrissian to scramble some fighters to close off the airspace above the palace. With the turbo lift blocked, this stairway is it." Mara stared at him, an icy shiver running abruptly through her. What with all the rush and commotion since this thing had started, she hadn't had time to pause and consider all the nuances of the situation, but now Bel Iblis's words and her own distant memories had combined in a blinding flash of insight. For a handful of heartbeats she stood there, thinking it through, wondering if it were real or a construct of her own imagination. But it held up, logical, tactically brilliant, with Grand Admiral Thrawn's fingerprints all over it. It had to be the answer. And it would have worked, except for a single flaw. Thrawn obviously didn't know she was here, or didn't believe she'd really been the Emperor's hand. "I'll be back," she told Bel Iblis, stepping around him and hurrying back down the hallway. She rounded the corner into a cross corridor, eyes studying the carved frieze running along the top of the wall. Somewhere along here would be the subtle marking she was looking for. There it was. She stopped in front of the otherwise ordinary-looking panelling, glancing both ways down the corridor as she did so. Skywalker and Organa Solo might accept her past associations without any qualms, but she doubted anyone else here would be quite so blasé about it. But the corridor was deserted. Stretching up to the frieze, she slid 2 fingers into the proper indentations, letting the warmth of her hand soak into the sensors there, and with a faint click the panel unlocked. She slipped inside, closing the panel behind her, and looked around. Built more or less parallel to the turbolift shafts, the Emperor's private passageways were by necessity narrow and cramped, but they were well lit, dust-free, and soundproof. And more importantly, they would take her past the Imperials on the presentation landing. 2 minutes and 3 staircases later, she was at the exit that opened out onto Organa Solo's floor. Taking a couple of deep breaths, preparing herself for combat, she stepped through the panel and out into the hallway. With the battle raging 3 staircases below, she would have expected to find a secondary rearguard stationed near their bolt hole. She was right. 2 men in the by now familiar palace security uniforms were crouched against the walls with their backs to her, keeping watch on the far end of the corridor. The noise of heavy blaster fire coming from the other direction was more than enough to cover her quiet footsteps, and it was likely neither of them had any idea she was even there as she shot them down. A quick check to make sure they were out of the fight, and she was heading down the corridor toward Organa Solo's suite. She had reached him and was just starting to pick her way across the debris from the shattered outer door when the blaster fire from inside was suddenly punctuated by an explosive crash. She clenched her teeth as the blasters of the defenders opened up, their noise mixing with that of the attackers. Rushing straight in without any attempt at stealth or cover would be a good way to get herself killed. But if she moved in more cautiously, someone in there was likely to be killed before she could get into firing position, unless... Leia Organa Solo, she called silently, stretching out through the forces she had earlier when Calrissian had gone for his blaster. No more certain now than she had been than that Organa Solo could even hear her. It's Mara. I'm coming up behind them. Surrender. You hear me? Surrender. 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 And as she reached the outer door, she heard Organa Solo shout, barely audible over the blaster fire. Stop! Stop shooting! We surrender. Carefully, Mara eased an eye around the door. There they were, 4 Imperials standing or kneeling at the blackened edges of the doorway, blasters trained warily inside, with 2 more inside, starting to get up from prone positions against the ruined security door, none of them giving the slightest bit of attention in her direction. Smiling tightly to herself, Mara leveled her blaster and opened fire. She had 2 of them down before the others even woke to the fact that she was there. A third fell as he spun around, trying in vain to bring his blaster to bear on her. The 4th was nearly to firing position when a shot from inside the room sent him spinning to the floor. 5 seconds later it was all over. There was 1 survivor, barely. We think it's the group's leader, Beliblis told Han as the 2 of them strode down the corridor toward the medical wing, tentatively identified as a Major Himron, though we won't know for certain until he's conscious again. If then. Han nodded, throwing a quick glance at yet another pair of alert-looking guards as they passed. If nothing else, this little fiasco had sure gotten security stirred up. About time, too. Any idea how they got in? That's going to be one of my first questions, Beliblis said. He's in intensive care. This way. Lando was waiting at the door of one of the medics when Han and Beliblis arrived. Is everyone okay? Lando asked, eyes flicking up and down at his friend. I sent Chewie up, but they told me I should stay here with the prisoner. Everyone's fine, Han assured him as Beliblis stepped past Lando and pulled the medic aside. Chewie was up there before I left, and he's helping Leia and Winter set up in another suite. By the way, thanks for coming up after us. No charge, Lando grunted, especially since all we got to do was watch. What, you couldn't have held off your little fireworks display for 2 more minutes? Don't look at me, pal, Han countered. It was Mara's timing, not mine. A shadow seemed to cross Lando's face. Right. Mara. Han frowned at him. What's that supposed to mean? I don't know, Lando said, shaking his head. There's still something about her that bothers me. Remember back at Card Space on Mirka, just before Theron dropped in and we had to go hide in the forest? You said you thought you knew her from somewhere, Han said. It was a comment that had been stuck in the back of his mind all these months too. You ever figure out where? Not yet, Lando growled, but I'm getting close. I know it. Han looked at Beliblis and the medic, thinking back to what Luke had said a couple of days later on their way off of Mirka, that Mara had told Luke flat out that she wanted to kill him. Wherever you saw her, she seems to be on our side now. Yeah, Lando said darkly. Maybe. Beliblis beckoned them over. We're going to try to wake him up, he said. Come on. They went inside. Surrounding the ICU bed were half of a dozen medics and EMD droids, plus 3 of Akbar's top security officers. At Beliblis' nod, one of the medics did something to the treatment wrap around the Imperial's upper arm, and as Han and Lando found places at the side of the bed, he coughed suddenly and his eyes fluttered open. Major Himron? One of the security officers asked. Can you hear me, Major? Yes, the Imperial breathed, blinking a couple of times. His eyes drifted between the people standing around him, and it seemed to Han that he suddenly became more alert. Yes, he repeated, stronger this time. Your attack has failed, the officer told him. Your men are all dead, and we're not sure yet whether you're going to live. Himron sighed and closed his eyes, but that alertness was still in his face. Fortunes of war, he said. Beliblis leaned forward. How did you get into the palace, Major? Guess it can't hurt now, Himron murmured. His breathing was becoming laboured. Back door, put in. Same time, private passage system, locked from inside. She let us in. Someone let you in? Beliblis said. Who? Himron opened his eyes. Our contact here. Name? Jade. Beliblis threw Han a startled glance. Mara Jade? Yes. Himron closed his eyes again, let out a deep breath. Special agent of Empire, once called Emperor's Hand. He fell silent and seemed to sink a little deeper into the bed. That's all I can permit right now, General Beliblis, the chief medic said. He needs rest and we need to get him stabilized. In a day or two, perhaps he'll be strong enough to answer more questions. That's all right, one of the security officers said, heading for the door. He's given us enough to start with. Wait a minute, Han called, starting after him. Where are you going? Where do you think? The officer retorted. I'm going to have Mara Jade put under arrest. On what, the word of an Imperial officer? He has no choice, Solo, Beliblis said quietly, laying a hand on Han's shoulder. Precautionary detention is required after an accusation this serious. Don't worry, we'll get it straightened out. We'd better, Han warned. Imperial agent, my eye. She took out at least 3 of them up there. He broke off at the look on Lando's face. Lando? Slowly Devo focused on him. That's it, he said quietly. That's where I saw her before. She was one of the new dancers at Jabba the Hutt's palace on Tatooine when we were setting up your rescue. Han frowned. At Jabba's? Yes. And I'm not sure, but in all that confusion before we left for the Great Pit of Carcoon, I seem to remember hearing her asking Jabba to let her come along on the sail barge. No, not asking. Begging was more like it. Han looked down at the unconscious Major Himron. The Emperor's Hand? And Luke had said she wanted to kill him. He shook off the thought. I don't care where she was, he said. She still shot those Imperials off our backs, up there. Come on, let's go help Leia get the twins settled, and then figure out what's going on around here. The Whistler's Whirlpool Tap Cafe on Trogan was one of the best examples Card had ever seen of a good idea ruined by the failure of its designers to think their whole plan through. Situated on the coast of Trogan's most densely populated continent, the Whirlpool had been built around a natural formation called the Drinking Cup, a bowl-shaped rock pit open to the sea at its base. 6 times a day, Trogan's massive tidal shifts sent the water level inside the bowl either up or down, turning it into a violent whitewater maelstrom in the process. With the Tap Cafe's tables arranged in concentric circles around the bowl, it made for a nice balance between luxury and spectacular natural drama, a perfect drawing card for the billions of humans and aliens enamored of that combination. Also, the designers and their backers had thought. Unfortunately, they'd rather overlooked 3 points. First, that such a place was almost by definition a tourist attraction, dependent on the vagaries of that market. Second, that once the charm of the Whirlpool itself wore off, the centralized design pretty well precluded remodeling the place for any other type of entertainment. And third, that even if such remodeling had occurred, the racket from the miniature breakers in the Drinking Cup would probably have drowned it out anyway. The people of the Kalia Saj Lilu on Burchest had turned their fizzled tourist attraction into a trade centre. The people of Trogan had simply abandoned the Whistler's Whirlpool. I keep expecting someone to buy this place and refurbish it, Card commented, looking around at the empty seats and tables as he and Aves walked down one of the aisles toward the Drinking Cup and the figure waiting there for them. The years of neglect showed certainly, but the place wasn't nearly as bad as it could have been. I always liked it myself, Aves agreed. Kind of noisy, but you get that almost everywhere you go these days. Certainly made eavesdropping between tables difficult, Card said. That alone made the place worthwhile. Hello, Gillespie. Card. Gillespie nodded in greeting, getting up from his table and offering his hand. I was starting to wonder if you were really going to show. The meeting's not for another 2 hours, Aves reminded him. Oh, come on, Gillespie said with a sly grin. Since when does Talon Card ever arrive anywhere on time? Though you could have saved yourself the trouble. My people have already checked things out. I appreciate the effort, Card said, which is not to say, of course, that he was going to pull his own people off that same job. With the Empire breathing down his neck and an Imperial garrison only 20 kilometers away, a little extra security wouldn't hurt. You have the guest list? Right here, Gillespie said, picking up a data pad and handing it over. Afraid it's not as long as I'd hoped. That's all right, Card assured him, running his eyes down the list. Small, certainly, but highly select, with some of the biggest names in smuggling coming personally. Brask, Partar, Elor, Dravis, that would be Billy's group. Billy himself didn't get around too much anymore. Mazik, Klingon the Zehefbra, Ferrier. Looked up sharply. Ferrier? He asked. Niles Ferrier, the spaceship thief? Yeah, that's him, Gillespie nodded, frowning. He does smuggling too. He also works for the Empire, Card countered. So do we, Gillespie shrugged. Last I heard, so did you. I'm not talking about smuggling merchandise to or from Imperial worlds, Card said. I'm talking about working directly for Grand Admiral Thrawn, doing such minor jobs as snatching the man who located the Katana fleet for him. Gillespie's face tightened, just noticeably, remembering perhaps his mad scramble off Ukiah one step ahead of the Imperial invasion force in those same Katana fleet ships. Ferrier did that, and seemed to enjoy doing it, Card told him, pulling out his comlink and thumbing it on. Lockton? Right here. Lockton's voice came promptly from the comlink. How do things look at the garrison? Like a morgue on its day off, Lockton said wryly. There hasn't been any movement in or out of the place for at least 3 hours. Card cocked an eyebrow. Indeed. That's very interesting. How about flights in or out, or activity within the garrison grounds themselves? Nothing of either, Lockton said. No kidding, Card. The place looks completely dead. Must have gotten some new training hollows in or something. Card smiled tightly. Yes, I'm sure that's it. All right, keep on them. Let me know immediately if there's any activity of any sort. You got it. Out. Card thumbed off the comlink and returned it to his belt. The Imperials aren't moving from their garrison, he told the others. Apparently not at all. Isn't that the way we want it? Gillespie asked. They can't drop a hammer on the party if they're snugged up there in their barracks. Agreed, Card nodded. On the other hand, I've never yet heard of an Imperial garrison simply taking a day off. Point, Gillespie admitted. Unless this big campaign of Thrawn's has all these third-rate garrisons on demand, all the more reason for them to be running daily patrols as a visible show of force, Card said. A man like Grand Admiral Thrawn counts on his opponent's perceptions to fill in the gaps in his actual strength. Maybe we should cancel the meeting, Ave suggested, looking uneasily back at the entrance. Could be they're setting us up. Card looked past Gillespie to the churning water sloshing up the walls of the drinking cup. In just under 2 hours, the water would be at its lowest and quietest level, which is why he'd arranged the meeting for them. If he called it off now, admitted to all these big-time smugglers that the Empire had Talon Card jumping at shadows. No, he said slowly. We'll stay. Our guests won't exactly be sitting here helpless after all, and we should have adequate warning of any official moves against us. He smiled thinly. Actually, it's almost worth the risk just to see what they have in mind. Gillespie shrugged. Maybe they're not planning anything at all. Maybe we chicaned Imperial intelligence so good that they missed this completely. That hardly sounds like the Imperial intelligence we all know and love, Card said, looking around. Still, we have 2 hours before the meeting. Let's see what we can arrange, shall we? They sat there in silence, each of the individuals and small groups sitting around its own table, while he made his pitch. And as he finished and looked around at them, Card knew they weren't convinced. Brask made it official. You speak well, Card, the Brub said, his thin tongue flicking out between his lips as he tasted the air. One might say passionately, if such a word could ever be said to apply to you, but you do not persuade. Do I truly not persuade, Brask? Card countered. Or do I merely fail to overcome your reluctance to stand up to the Empire? Brask's expression didn't change, but the pitted grey-green skin of his face, about all of him that was visible outside his body armor, turned a little greyer. The Empire pays well for smuggled goods, he said. And for slaves as well? Partar demanded in the sing-song Hodin language. Her snake-like head appendages bounced gently as she snapped her mouth in a Hodin gesture of contempt. And for victims of kidnap? You are no better than was the Hutt. One of Brask's bodyguards shifted in his seat, a man Card knew who had escaped with Brask from Jabba the Hutt's indentured servitude when Luke Skywalker and his allies had chopped off the head of that organization. No one who knew the Hutt would say that, he growled, jabbing a stiff finger on the table beside him for emphasis. We're not here to argue, Card said before Partar or any of her entourage could respond. Why are we here? Nazik spoke up, lounging in his seat between a horn-headed Gotal and a decorative but vacant-faced woman with her hair done up in elaborate platelets around half a dozen large enameled needles. You'll forgive me, Card, but this sounds very much like a New Republic recruitment speech. Yeah, and Han Solo's already pitched that one to us, Jarvis agreed, propping his feet up on the table. Billy's already said he wasn't interested in hauling the New Republic's cargo. Too dangerous, Klingon put in, shaking his shaggy black and white striped mane. Far too dangerous. Really? Card said, feigning surprise. Why is it dangerous? You must be joking, Vizahefbra rumbled, shaking his mane again. With Imperial harassment of New Republic shipping as it is, you take your life in a claw grip every time you lift off. So what you're saying, Card suggested, is that Imperial strength is becoming increasingly dangerous to our business activities. Oh, no you don't, Card, Brask said, waving a large finger toward him. You're not going to persuade us into going along with this scheme by twisting our words. I haven't suggested any schemes, Brask, Card said. All I've suggested is that we provide the New Republic with any useful information we might happen to come across in the course of our activities. And you don't think the Empire would find this activity unacceptable? Brask asked. Since when do we care what the Empire thinks? Parta countered. Since Grand Admiral Thrawn took command, Brask said bluntly. I've heard stories of this warlord, Parta. It was he who forced my world under the Imperial Shroud. That ought to be a good reason for you to stand up to him, Gillespie pointed out. If you're afraid of what Thrawn might do to you now, just think what'll happen to you if he gets the whole galaxy under the Imperial Shroud again. Nothing will happen to us if we don't oppose him, Brask insisted. They need our services too much for that. That's a nice theory, a voice spoke up from near the back of the group. But I can tell you right now, it won't hold a mug's worth of vacuum. Card focused on the speaker. He was a big, thick-built human with dark hair and a beard. A thin, unlit cigar clenched in his teeth. And you are? Card asked, though he was pretty sure he knew. Niles Ferrier, the over-identified himself. And I can tell you flat out that minding your own business isn't going to do you a lame bit of good if Thrawn decides he wants you. And yet he pays well, Mazik said, idly stroking the hand of his female companion. Or so I've heard. You've heard that, huh? Ferrier growled. Have you also heard that he grabbed me off Newcarb and confiscated my ship, then ordered me out on a nasty little errand for him aboard a bomb-rigged intelligence bucket? Oh, and go ahead and guess what the penalty was going to be if we couldn't do it. Card looked around the room, listening to the gently sloshing water in the drinking cup behind him, and holding his silence. This was hardly the way Solo had described Ferrier's involvement, and all other things being equal, he would probably trust Solo's rendition over the ship thieves. Still, it was always possible Solo had misinterpreted things. And if Ferrier's story helped convince the others that the Empire had to be opposed, were you paid for all your trouble? Mazik asked. Of course I was paid, Ferrier sniffed. That's not the point. It is for me, Mazik said, turning back to look at Card. Sorry, Card, but I still haven't heard any good reason for me to stick my neck out this way. What about the Empire's new traffic in clones? Card reminded him. Doesn't that worry you? I'm not especially happy about it, no, Mazik conceded, but I figure that's a New Republic's problem, not ours. When does it become our problem? Parta demanded. When the Empire has replaced all smugglers with these clones? No one's going to replace us with clones, Travis said. You know, Brask is right, Card. The Empire needs us too much to bother us, provided we don't take sides. Exactly, Mazik said. We're businessmen, pure and simple, and I for one intend to stay that way. If the New Republic can outbid the Empire for information, I'll be happy to sell it to them. If not, he shrugged. Card nodded, privately conceding defeat. Parta might be willing to discuss the matter further, and possibly one or two of the others. Elor, perhaps. The Duro had so far stayed out of the conversation, which with his species was often a sign of agreement. But none of the rest were convinced, and pushing them further at this point would only annoy them. Later, perhaps, they might be willing to accept the realities of the Empire's threat. Very well, he said. I think it's clear now where all of you stand on this. Thank you for your time. Perhaps we can plan to meet again after. And without warning, the back of the Whistler's whirlpool blew in. Stay where you are, an amplified voice shouted through the din. Face forward. No one move. Everyone here is under Imperial detention. Card squinted over the heads of his suddenly frozen audience to the rear of the building. Through the smoke and dust he could see a double line of about 30 Imperial Army troops crunching their way across the debris where the back wall had been, their flanks protected by two pair of white-armored stormtroopers. Behind them, almost obscured by the haze, he could see two chariot command speeders hovering in backup positions. So they came to the party after all, he murmured, with a big hammer. Gillespie agreed tightly from beside him. Looks like you were right about Ferrier. Perhaps. Card looked over at Ferrier, half expecting to see a triumphant smirk on the big man's face. But Ferrier wasn't looking at him. His attention was slightly off to the side, not looking at the approaching troopers, but at a section of wall to the right of the new hole. Card followed the line of his gaze, just in time to see a solid black shadow detach itself from the wall and move silently up behind one set of flanking stormtroopers. On the other hand, perhaps not, he told Gillespie, nodding slightly toward the shadow. Take a look, just past Elor's shoulder. Gillespie inhaled sharply. What in hell's name is that? Ferrier's pet Defal, I think, Card said. Sometimes called Wraiths. Solo told me about him. This is it. Everyone ready? We're ready, Gillespie said, and there were echoing murmurs from behind them. Card swept his gaze across his fellow smugglers and their aides, catching each pair of eyes in turn. They gazed back, their shock at the ambush rapidly turning to a cold anger, and they too were ready. The shadow of Ferrier's Defal reached the end of the approaching line of Imperials, and suddenly one of the stormtroopers was hurled bodily off his feet to slam crosswise into his companion. The nearest troopers reacted instantly, swinging their weapons to the side as they searched for the unseen attacker. Now! Card murmured, and from the corner of his eye he saw the long muzzles of two Blastech A280 blaster rifles swing up over the rim of the drinking cup and open fire. The first salvo cut through the center of the line, taking out a handful of the Imperials before the rest were able to dive for cover among the empty tables and chairs. Card took a long step forward, tipping over the nearest table and dropping to one knee behind it. An almost unnecessary precaution. The Imperials' attention had been distracted away from their intended prisoners for a fatal half-second, and even as Card yanked out his weapon, the entire room exploded into blaster fire. Brask and his bodyguards took out an entire squad of the troopers in the first 5 seconds, with a synchronized fire that showed the Brub hadn't forgotten his mercenary background. Parta's entourage was concentrating on the other end of the line, their weapons smaller and less devastating than Brask's heavy blaster pistols, but more than enough to keep the Imperials pinned down. Dravis, Elor, and Klingon were taking advantage of that cover fire to pick off the remaining troops one by one. Mazik, in contrast, was ignoring the nearer threat of the troopers to blast away at the chariot command speeders outside. A good idea, actually. Aves! Fine! Card shouted over the din. Concentrate fire on the chariots! There were shouts of acknowledgement from the edge of the drinking cup behind him, and the rifle blasts sizzling past his shoulder shifted their aim. Card eased a little over his table, caught a glimpse of Mazik's female companion, her plaited hair down around her shoulders, now and her face no longer blank, as she held the last of her enameled needles of lethal accuracy at one of the troopers. Another Imperial lunged up out of cover, bringing his rifle to bear on her, falling backward again as Card's shot caught him square in the torso. A pair of shots hit his cover table, sending clouds of splinters into the air and forcing him to drop to the floor. From outside came the sound of a massive explosion, echoed an instant later by a second blast. And then suddenly, it was all over. Carefully, Card eased up over his table again. The others were doing likewise, weapons held at the ready as they surveyed the wreckage around them. Klingon was holding an arm gingerly out from his body as he dug in his belt pack for a bandage. Brask's tunic was burned away in several places, the body armor beneath it blackened and blistered. Everyone all right? Card called. Mazik straightened up. Even at this distance, Card could see the white knuckles gripping his blaster. They got Lishma, he said, his voice deadly quiet. He wasn't even shooting. Card dropped his gaze to the broken table at Mazik's feet and the goat-owl lying motionless and half-hidden beneath it. I'm sorry, he said, and meant it. He'd always rather liked the goat-owl people. I'm sorry too, Mazik said, jamming his blaster back into its holster and looking at Card with smouldering eyes. But the Empire's going to be a lot sorrier. Okay, Card, I'm convinced. Where do I sign up? Somewhere far away from here, I think, Card said, peering out the shattered wall at the burning chariots as he pulled out his comlink. No one was moving out there, but that wouldn't last. They'll surely have backup on the way. Lockton, Torv, you there? Right here, Torv's voice came. What in space was all that? The Imperials decided they wanted to play after all, Card told him grimly. Seeked in with a couple of chariots. Anyone stirring in either of your areas? Not here, Torv said. Wherever they came from, they didn't start at the spaceport. Ditto here, Lockton put in. Garrison still quiet as a grave. Let's hope it stays that way for a few more minutes, Card said. Pass the word to the others. We're pulling back to the ship. On our way. See you there. Card flicked off the comlink and turned around. Gillespie was just helping Aves and Fine pull themselves out over the lip of the drinking cup, the web harnesses that had held them suspended just beneath the rocky edge trailing behind them. Nicely done, gentlemen, he complimented them. Thank you. Our pleasure, Aves grunted, popping his harness and accepting his blaster rifle back from Gillespie. Even with the water level at its lowest, he noticed, the turbulence had still managed to soak both men up to their knees. Time to make ourselves scarce? Just as soon as we can, Card agreed, turning back to the other smugglers. Well, gentlefolk, we'll see you in space. There was no ambush waiting for them by the wild card. No ambush, no fighter pursuit, no Imperial Star Destroyer lurking in orbit for them. From all appearances, the incident back of the Whistler's whirlpool might just as well have been an elaborate mass hallucination. Except for the destruction of the Tap Cafe and the gutted chariots in the very real burns, and of course for dead Goat-Howl. So what's the plan? Dravis asked. You want us to help hunt down this clone pipeline you mentioned, right? Yes, Card told him. We know it goes through Podarus, so Aura Sector is the place to start. It once went through Podarus, Klingon pointed out. Thrawn could have moved it by now, though presumably not without leaving some traces we can backtrack, Card said. So, have we an agreement? My group's with you, Ferrier put in promptly. Matter of fact, Card, if you want, I'll see what I can do about getting your people some real fighting ships. I may take you up on that, Card promised. Parta, we will assist in the search, Parta said, her voice about as angry as Card had ever heard it. The death of the Goat-Howl was hitting her almost as hard as it had hit Mazik. The Empire must be taught a lesson. Thank you, Card said. Mazik, I agree with Parta, he said coldly, but I think the lesson needs to be a bit more eye-catching. You go ahead and do your clone hunt. Elora and I have something else in mind. Card looked at Aves, who shrugged. If he wants to go slap their hands, who are we to stop him? The other murmured. Card shrugged back and nodded. All right, he said to Mazik. Good luck. Try not to bite off more than you can chew. We won't, Mazik said. We're heading out. See you later. At the far starboard edge of the viewport, two of the ships in their least formation flickered with pseudo-motion and vanished into hyperspace. That just leaves you, Brask, Card prompted. What do you say? There was a long, subtly voiced sigh from the comm speaker, one of many untranslatable Brub verbal gestures. I cannot and will not stand against Grand Admiral Thrawn, he said at last. To give information to the New Republic would be to invite his hatred and wrath upon me, another voice sighed. But I will also not interfere with your activities or bring them to his attention. Fair enough, Card nodded. It was, in fact, far more than he'd expected from Brask. The Brub's fear of the Empire ran deep. Well then, let's organize our groups and plan to reconvene out of Chazwa in, say, 5 days. Good luck, all. The others acknowledged and signed off, and one by one made their jumps to light speed. So much for staying neutral, Ave sighed as he checked the nav computer. Mara's going to have a fit when she finds out. When is she coming back, by the way? As soon as I can find a way to get her here, Card said, feeling a twinge of guilt. It had been several days since he'd gotten the message that she and Gent were ready to rejoin him, a message that had probably been several more days in reaching him in the first place. She was probably ready to bite whole metal by now. After that last raise in the Imperial price on us, there are probably 20 bounty hunters waiting off Coruscant for us to show up. Ave shifted uncomfortably. Is that what you think happened down there? Some bounty hunter got wind of the meeting and tipped off the Imperials? Card gazed out at the stars. I really don't know what all that was about, he admitted. Bounty hunters generally avoid tipping off the authorities unless they already have a financial agreement. On the other hand, when the Imperials go to the effort of carrying out a raid, one expects them to do a more competent job of it. Unless they were just tailing Gillespie and didn't know the rest of us were there, Ave suggested hesitantly. Could be that 3 squads of troops and a couple of chariots is all he rates. I suppose that's possible, Card conceded. Hard to believe their intelligence was that spotty, though. Well, I'll have our people on Trogan make some quiet inquiries, see if they can backtrack that unit, and find out where the tip-off came from. In the meantime, we have a hunt to organize. Let's get to it. Niles Ferry was smiling behind that unkempt beard of his. Palaon noticed as the stormtroopers escorted him across the bridge, a smug, highly self-satisfied type of smile that showed he had no idea whatsoever why he'd been brought to the Chimera. He's here, Admiral, Palaon murmured. I know, Thrawn said calmly, his back to the approaching spaceship thief. Calmly, but with a deadly look in his glowing red eyes. Grimacing, Palaon braced himself. This wasn't going to be pretty. The group reached Thrawn's command chair and halted. Niles Ferrier, Admiral, the stormtrooper commander stated, as per orders. For a long moment the Grand Admiral didn't move, and as Palaon watched, the smirk on Ferrier's face slipped a bit. You were on Trogan 2 days ago, Thrawn said at last, still not turning around. You met with 2 men currently wanted by the Empire, Talon Card and Samuel Thomas Gillespie. You also persuaded a small and unprepared task force under one Lieutenant Reynold Kosk to launch a rash attack on this meeting, an attack which failed. Is all this true? Sure is, Ferrier nodded. See, that's why I sent you that message, so you'd know. Then I should like to hear your reasons. Thrawn cut him off, swiveling his chair around at last to gaze up at the thief. Why I should not order your immediate execution. Ferrier's mouth dropped open. What? He said. But I've gotten him with Card. He trusts me now. See? That was the whole idea. I can dig out the rest of his gang and deliver the whole bunch to you. He trailed off, his throat bobbing as he swallowed. You were directly responsible for the deaths of 4 stormtroopers and 32 Imperial Army troops, Thrawn continued. Also for the destruction of 2 chariot command speeders and their crews. I am not the Lord Darth Vader, Ferrier. I do not spend my men recklessly, nor do I take their deaths lightly. The colour was starting to leave Ferrier's face. Sir, Admiral, I know that you've put a bounty on Card's whole group of almost, but all that pales in comparison to the utter disaster you've created. Thrawn cut him off again. Intelligence informed me of this meeting of smuggler chiefs almost 4 days ago. I knew the location, the timing, and the probable guest list. And I had already given the Trogan garrison precise instructions, Ferrier, to leave it strictly alone. Palaon hadn't thought Ferrier's face would get any paler. He was wrong. Sir, but I don't get it. I'm sure you don't, Thrawn said, his voice deadly quiet. He gestured, and from his position beside Thrawn's chair, the Noghri bodyguard Rook took a step forward. But it's really quite simple. I know these smugglers, Ferrier. I've studied their operations, and I've made it a point to deal personally with each of them at least once over the past year. None of them wants to become entangled in this war, and without your staged attack, I'm quite certain they would have left Trogan convinced that they could sit things out in traditional smuggler neutrality. He gestured again to Rook, and suddenly the Nograi's slender assassin's knife was in his hand. The result of your interference, he continued quietly, has been to unite them against the Empire. Precisely the turn of events I had gone to great lengths to avoid. His glowing eyes bored into Ferrier's face, and I do not appreciate having my efforts wasted. Ferrier's eyes flicked back and forth between Thrawn and the blade in Rook's hand, his face now gone from pasty white to grey. "I'm sorry, Admiral," he said, the words coming out with obvious difficulty. I mean, just give me another chance, huh? Just one more chance. I can deliver card, I swear to you. Well, hey, never mind even card. I'll deliver all of them to you. He ran out of words and just stood there looking sick. Thrawn let him hang for another few heartbeats. "You are a small-minded fool, Ferrier," he said at last. "But even fools occasionally have their uses. You will have one more chance, one last chance. I trust I make myself clear." "Yes, Admiral, real clear," Ferrier said, his head jerking up and down in something closer to a twitch than a nod. "Good." Thrawn gestured, and Rook's knife vanished. "You can start by telling me exactly what they have planned." "Sure." Ferrier took a shuddering breath. "Card, Parta, and Klingon are going to meet in, I guess 3 days now, at Chazwa. Oh, they know you're running your new clones through Aura Sector, do they?" Thrawn said evenly. "And they intend to stop it." "No, just find out where it's coming from." "Then they're going to tell the New Republic. Brask isn't going along, but he said he wouldn't stop them either. Jarvis is going to check with Billy and get back to them. And Mazik and Ella have something else planned. They didn't say what." He ran out of words, air, and stopped. "All right," Thrawn said after a moment. "This is what you're going to do. You and your people will meet Card and the others at Chazwa on schedule. You will take Card a gift, an assault shuttle you stole from the Hishian patrol station. Rigged, right?" Ferrier nodded eagerly. "Yeah, that was my idea too. Give him some rigged ships that—" "Card will of course examine this gift thoroughly," Thrawn interrupted him, his patience clearly becoming strained. "The ship will therefore be in perfect condition. Its purpose is merely to establish your credibility, assuming you still have any." Ferrier's lip twisted. "Yes, sir." "And then you will continue to report on Card's activities," Thrawn told him, "and from time to time I'll be sending you further instructions. Instructions which you will carry out instantly and without question. Is that clear?" "Sure," Ferrier said. "Don't worry, Admiral. You can count on me." "I certainly hope so." Deliberately, Thrawn looked at Rook. "Because I would hate to have to send Rook to pay you a visit. I trust I make myself understood." Ferrier looked at Rook too, and swallowed hard. "Yeah, I get it." "Good." He swiveled his chair to face away from Ferrier again. "Commander, escort our guest back to his ship and see that his people are checked out on the assault shuttle I've had prepared for them." "Yes, sir," the Stormtrooper commander said. He gave Ferrier a nudge, and the group turned and headed aft. "Go with them, Rook," Thrawn said. "Ferrier has a small mind, and I want to leave it here filled with the knowledge of what will happen if he trips over my plans again." "Yes, my lord," the Nograi said, and slipped silently away after the departing ship thief. Thrawn turned to Palaeon. "Your analysis, Captain?" "Not a good situation, sir," Palaeon said, "but not as bad as it might have been. We have a potential line on Card's group, if you can believe Ferrier, and in the meantime he and his new allies won't be doing anything but following the decoy trail we've already prepared for the rebellion. And eventually they'll tire of that and again go their separate ways," Thrawn agreed, his glowing eyes narrowed in thought, "particularly as the financial burden of lost Imperial business begins to take its toll. Still, that will take time." "What are the options?" Palaeon asked. "Take Ferrier up on his offering to give them booby-trapped ships?" Thrawn smiled. "I have something more useful and satisfying in mind, Captain. Eventually I'm sure some of the other smugglers will realize how unconvincing the Chogan attack really was. With a little judiciously planted evidence, perhaps we can persuade them that it was Card who was behind it." Palaeon blinked. "Card?" he repeated. "Why not?" Thrawn asked. "A deceitful and heavy-handed attempt, shall we say, to persuade the others that his fears about the Empire were justified. It would certainly lose Card any influence he might have over them, as well as possibly saving us the trouble of hunting him down ourselves." "It's something to think about, sir," Palaeon agreed diplomatically. The middle of a major offensive, in his opinion, was not the right time to be worrying about exacting vengeance on the dregs of the galaxy's underfringes. There would be plenty of time for that after the rebellion had been pounded into dust. "May I suggest, Admiral, that the stalled campaign of Kataris requires your attention?" Thrawn smiled again. "Your devotion to duty is commendable, Captain." He turned his head to gaze out the side viewport. "No word yet from Coruscant?" "Not yet, sir," Palaeon said, checking the comm log update just to be sure. "But you remember what Himron said about first creating a data trail. He might have run into some delays." "Perhaps." Thrawn turned back, and Palaeon could see the slight tightness in his face. "Perhaps not." Still, even if we fail to obtain the twins for our beloved Jedi Master, Major Himron's fingering of Mera Jade should succeed in neutralizing her as a threat to us. For the moment, that's what's important. He straightened in his chair. Set course for the Kataris battle plane, Captain. We'll leave as soon as Farrier is clear.